Hello, my friends. I hope you're all doing well tonight. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'm always excited to see people joining from different parts of the world. Tonight, I have a brand new story for you. Settle in, listen all the way through, and when it's over, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comments. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these relaxing stories. Your support helps me create more peaceful stories for you. Now, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and if you'd like, turn on a fan. Let its soft, gentle hum become part of the peaceful atmosphere around you. And before tonight's story begins, gently close your eyes, rest your head on your pillow, take a slow, deep breath, and allow your body to relax. Let go of the worries of the day, quiet your thoughts, and simply listen as we drift into tonight's peaceful journey together. The first light of morning arrived quietly over the northern mountains, brushing the sky with soft shades of silver, pale blue, and warm gold. Wisps of mist drifted through endless pine forests, moving so gently that they seemed less like clouds and more like living memories. Every tree stood patiently upon the hillsides, as though it had been watching over the land for centuries. Far beyond, crowded cities and busy highways, hidden where few maps offered more than a simple name, rested a quiet valley called Everpine. People who lived there rarely spoke loudly. They believed that every season had its own voice, and if someone hurried too much, they might miss what the valley was trying to say. Spring arrived with tiny white blossoms covering forgotten paths. Summer filled the forests with birdsong and warm afternoon light. Autumn painted every hillside with amber, crimson, and deep gold. Winter wrapped everything beneath soft blankets of snow until even time itself seemed to slow. To most of the world, Everpine was little more than an isolated mountain village. To those who truly knew it, it was something far rarer. It was a place where broken hearts quietly learned how to heal. On a cool autumn morning, a single bus climbed the winding mountain road toward the valley. Its engine hummed softly as it disappeared into forests where the pine trees grew so tall that their branches almost touched above the road, forming long green tunnels filled with shifting light. Among the few passengers sat a young man named Oliver. He rested beside the window, with a weathered leather backpack at his feet, and an old notebook resting on his lap. The notebook was almost empty, except for a single sentence written across the first page. Maybe peace still exists somewhere. He read those words again, without turning the page. They were not written as a question. They were written as hope. Oliver had spent years living in a city where every hour belonged to deadlines, crowded streets, and endless noise. Days disappeared before he noticed them. Weeks blended together. Even weekends often felt borrowed from work instead of life. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what silence sounded like. When he finally decided to leave for a while, he had no destination in mind, only a simple wish: to breathe, to think, to remember who he had been before life became something he was always trying to catch. A retired geography teacher had once mentioned a valley hidden beyond the northern mountains. "If you're ever tired of racing the world," the old man had said with a gentle smile, "go where the mountains stop keeping secrets." At the time, Oliver had laughed politely. Now he found himself following those very words. Outside the window, the landscape slowly changed. Concrete buildings disappeared behind rolling hills. Telephone wires became fewer. The air looked clearer. The forests grew deeper. The farther the bus traveled, the quieter everything became. Even the conversations between passengers gradually faded, until only the soft rhythm of the wheels remained. Oliver leaned his forehead against the cool glass. For the first time in many months, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow. He was simply watching the world pass by. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something he had been searching for all along. As the road curved around the final mountain ridge, the mist slowly lifted. Beyond it lay a valley unlike any place Oliver had ever seen. Golden fields stretched between winding rivers. Stone cottages rested beneath towering pine trees. Thin ribbons of chimney smoke drifted lazily into the crisp morning air. A narrow wooden bridge crossed a sparkling stream that reflected the first colors of autumn. In the distance, the gentle ringing of a church bell floated across the valley. No one hurried. No one shouted. The whole place seemed to breathe with calm purpose. The bus slowed. A weathered wooden sign stood beside the road. Its carved letters were simple. "Welcome to Everpine." Below the greeting, someone had carved another line by hand. "Walk gently. Time listens here." Oliver smiled without realizing it. He had traveled hundreds of miles to find a place he wasn't even sure existed. Yet, as the bus rolled quietly into the valley, an unfamiliar feeling settled in his heart. Not excitement, not relief. Something quieter, something deeper. For reasons he could not explain, Everpine did not feel like a place he was visiting. It felt like a place that had been waiting for him, and waiting. The bus came to a gentle stop beside a small stone platform, no larger than a village square. There was no station building, no rows of shops, and no crowds waiting to greet arriving travelers. Only a wooden bench, a weathered notice board, and a single maple tree whose leaves glowed like polished amber beneath the autumn sun. For a moment, no one moved. Then the driver stood, stretched his shoulders, and smiled toward the handful of passengers. "Everpine," he said warmly. "End of the line." Oliver picked up his backpack and stepped down onto the gravel path. The first thing he noticed was the air. It carried the crisp scent of pine needles, damp earth, and fresh water flowing somewhere nearby. After years of breathing city air filled with smoke and concrete, the valley felt almost impossibly clean. He took a slow breath, then another. His shoulders relaxed without him realizing it. The bus doors closed behind him with a quiet hiss. A moment later, the vehicle disappeared around the winding road, leaving only the fading sound of its engine. Silence returned. Not an empty silence. A living one. Birdsong echoed from the treetops. A distant stream murmured over smooth stones. Somewhere across the valley, a church bell rang once before fading into the cool morning air. Oliver smiled to himself. For the first time in years, nothing seemed to be asking anything of him. He was simply there. A narrow cobblestone path led away from the roadside and into the village. Stone cottages stood beneath towering pine trees, each with flower boxes beneath their windows. Late autumn blooms, violets, chrysanthemums, and tiny white asters added gentle splashes of color against gray stone walls. Thin trails of smoke drifted lazily from old chimneys. Someone was baking fresh bread. Someone else was splitting firewood. Two children chased one another across a grassy lane, laughing as a golden retriever bounded happily behind them. No one seemed rushed. No one seemed distracted. People greeted one another by name. Some stopped simply to ask how the morning felt. Not how work was going. Not what needed to be finished. Only, "How is your morning?" Oliver found himself slowing his own steps without thinking. The rhythm of Everpine seemed contagious. Near the center of the village stood a small stone fountain shaped like an ancient pine cone. Crystal clear water flowed continuously into a circular basin where sparrows gathered to drink. Beside it sat an elderly man feeding breadcrumbs to a flock of pigeons. He wore a thick wool coat patched at the elbows, sturdy leather boots, and a flat brown cap that looked older than Oliver himself. The old man glanced up as Oliver approached. "You must be new." His voice carried quiet amusement rather than surprise. Oliver nodded politely. "I arrived just now." "I thought so." The old man brushed crumbs from his hands before standing. "I've lived here long enough to recognize every face in the valley." He extended a weathered hand. "My name is Thomas." Oliver shook it. "Oliver?" Thomas studied him for a brief moment. Not unkindly, but thoughtfully, as though reading something hidden beneath his expression. "You've come a long way." "I suppose I have." Thomas smiled. "Most people who find Everpine aren't only traveling across mountains." Oliver blinked. "I'm not sure I understand." "You will?" The old carpenter's eyes twinkled. "The valley has a habit of explaining itself slowly." They walked together beneath rows of ancient pine trees, whose branches whispered softly in the morning breeze. Thomas greeted nearly everyone they passed. A farmer carrying baskets of apples, an elderly woman knitting beside her doorway, a young boy balancing a stack of library books taller than his arms. Each greeting was unhurried. Each conversation lasted only a minute or two. Yet none felt rushed toward an ending. Oliver noticed something unusual. No one carried a phone. No one seemed concerned about the time. Even the village clock above the small chapel appeared several minutes behind. When Oliver mentioned it, Thomas chuckled. "That clock has been slow for nearly 30 years. No one's fixed it?" "Oh, several people could." Thomas looked toward the chapel with a fond smile. "We simply decided we preferred it that way." Oliver laughed softly. For reasons he couldn't explain, the answer felt perfectly reasonable. The path curved toward a wooden bridge crossing a narrow stream. Sunlight shimmered across the clear water, revealing smooth stones beneath its surface. Tiny fish darted between patches of waving green moss. Thomas rested one hand upon the bridge railing. "My father built this bridge." Oliver ran his fingers gently across the polished wood. It felt remarkably solid despite its age. He must have been an excellent carpenter. "He was." Thomas smiled quietly. "He always said, 'Wood remembers every hand, and that shapes it.'" Oliver looked again at the bridge. The grain of the timber caught the light like flowing lines upon old parchment. It almost looked alive. "You'll hear many unusual sayings while living here," Thomas continued. "Living here?" Oliver repeated. "I've only come for a short visit." Thomas looked toward the distant mountains surrounding the valley. So did nearly everyone who stayed. A cool breeze stirred the pine branches overhead. Somewhere deep within the forest, a raven called once before falling silent. Thomas's expression grew thoughtful. Everpine chooses its own pace. "And sometimes," he said almost to himself, "it chooses its people." Oliver followed his gaze toward the endless forest beyond the village. For just a heartbeat, he thought he saw something between the trees. A figure, standing perfectly still, watching. Then the mist drifted through the pines once more, and whatever had been there was gone. The morning sun climbed a little higher, spilling gentle light across the valley. Dew still clung to the grass, sparkling like scattered glass beneath the branches of the ancient pines. A cool breeze carried the scent of cedar, fresh water, and bread cooling on windowsills. Oliver stood quietly at the center of the wooden bridge, his hands resting on the smooth railing. He looked toward the place where he thought he had seen the figure among the trees. Nothing. Only layers of mist drifting between the trunks. Perhaps it had been a shadow. Or perhaps the valley was simply playing tricks with the newcomer. Thomas watched him for a moment before speaking. "Everpine teaches patience," he said. "Not every question deserves an immediate answer." Oliver smiled faintly. "I've spent years looking for answers." "And did you find them?" Oliver looked down at the stream flowing beneath the bridge. "No." Thomas nodded, as though he had expected that reply. "Good." Oliver raised an eyebrow. "Good?" The people who arrive believing they already know everything usually leave within a week. A quiet laugh escaped Oliver. Thomas had a way of speaking that sounded mysterious at first, but became surprisingly comforting a moment later. They crossed the bridge together. On the other side stood a small workshop tucked beneath towering pine trees. Ivy climbed its stone walls, and colorful wildflowers bordered a narrow path leading to the front door. A wooden sign hung above the entrance. Thomas Alder Carpenter. The workshop windows were open, and the warm scent of freshly cut cedar drifted into the morning air. Inside, sunlight poured through dusty panes, illuminating shelves filled with hand-carved bowls, chairs, toys, walking sticks, and delicate wooden birds whose wings seemed ready to take flight. Oliver stepped inside slowly. "It feels like a museum," Thomas chuckled. "I hope not." "Why?" "Because museums hold things that have stopped living." He picked up a small wooden robin from the workbench and gently brushed away a trace of sawdust. "I prefer making things that become part of someone's everyday life." He handed the bird to Oliver. Its surface was smooth, warm, and carefully polished. Tiny carved feathers covered its wings with remarkable detail. "This is beautiful." "It isn't finished." Oliver looked closer. The bird's eyes had not yet been carved. Thomas smiled. "My father taught me something many years ago." "What was that?" "Never carve the eyes until you've imagined where the bird wishes to fly." Oliver turned the little carving over in his hands. It sounded like advice about woodworking, yet somehow it felt like advice about life. Near the back of the workshop stood an enormous workbench scarred by decades of careful craftsmanship. Dozens of chisels hung neatly above it, arranged by size and age. Each tool had a polished wooden handle worn smooth by countless hours of use. Thomas noticed Oliver studying them. "Some belonged to my grandfather." He lifted one of the oldest chisels. "The handle has been held by 3 generations." Oliver ran his fingers lightly across the worn wood. "It must be difficult to replace tools like these." Thomas shook his head. "They're not meant to be replaced. They're meant to be cared for." His words lingered in the quiet room. Oliver thought about how often people threw away things that had grown old. Furniture, letters, dreams. sometimes even friendships. Perhaps Everpine measured value differently. A kettle began to whistle softly from a small iron stove in the corner. Thomas prepared tea with practiced ease, placing 2 handmade ceramic cups on a round wooden table beside the window. Outside, the village moved at its gentle pace. A farmer led 2 horses along the lane. Children gathered pine cones beneath an enormous evergreen. An elderly couple walked hand in hand without speaking. Neither seemed in a hurry to reach wherever they were going. Thomas poured the tea. Chamomile and mountain mint. Oliver took a careful sip. The warmth spread through him almost instantly. I've never tasted tea like this. The herbs grow just beyond the eastern meadow. Who grows them? Thomas smiled. You'll meet her soon enough. Something in his voice suggested there was a story waiting behind those words. After they finished their tea, Thomas opened a weathered wooden chest tucked beneath the workbench. Inside lay dozens of old journals, sketches, faded photographs, and folded maps. Oliver noticed one photograph resting near the top. It showed the wooden bridge many decades earlier. Several villagers stood smiling beside it. Among them was a much younger Thomas. But what caught Oliver's attention wasn't Thomas. It was the young man standing beside him. His face looked strangely familiar, almost impossibly familiar. Who's that? Oliver asked. Thomas looked at the photograph for a long moment. His warm smile faded into quiet reflection. His name was Elias. A friend? The best friend I ever had. What happened to him? Thomas gently returned the photograph to the chest before closing the lid. He left Everpine and never came back. The room fell silent. Oliver sensed there was much more to the story, but he didn't ask another question. Some memories, he realized, needed to choose their own moment to be shared. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the workshop floor, the church bell rang 3 slow notes. Thomas stood and reached for his coat. Come, he said. There's someone I'd like you to meet. Who? The person who makes sure no one in Everpine stays hungry. Oliver laughed. That sounds important. Thomas smiled. It is. Together, they stepped out into the cool autumn afternoon and followed the winding lane toward the sweet aroma of freshly baked bread drifting through the village. Waiting at the end of the road was a small bakery with flower-filled windows, and a woman whose kindness had quietly become the heart of Everpine. The sweet scent of warm bread drifted through the village long before Oliver and Thomas reached the bakery. It lingered in the cool autumn air like a familiar melody, wrapping itself around every narrow lane and stone cottage. The aroma carried hints of fresh butter, cinnamon, roasted apples, and something else Oliver could not quite name. A fragrance that reminded him of childhood mornings he had almost forgotten. Thomas smiled as he noticed Oliver breathing it in. That, he said, is how most people know they've made it home. Oliver looked at him. Home? Thomas simply nodded. You'll understand. The bakery stood on a quiet corner where 3 cobblestone streets met. Its walls were built of pale grey stone, softened by climbing ivy, and its roof was covered in weathered cedar shingles that glowed warmly beneath the afternoon sun. Window boxes overflowed with late-season flowers, while bundles of dried lavender and rosemary hung beside the front door. Above the entrance, a hand-painted sign read, Martha's Bakery beneath it, in smaller letters. Every loaf carries a little kindness. Oliver smiled before they had even stepped inside. A small brass bell chimed gently as Thomas pushed open the door. Warmth welcomed them immediately. The air inside was rich with the comforting scent of baking bread, sweet pastries, and freshly brewed tea. Wooden shelves displayed golden loaves, berry tarts, honey cakes, buttery biscuits, and fruit pies whose flaky crusts gleamed in the soft light. The bakery was busy, though no one appeared hurried. An elderly couple shared a single cinnamon roll at a corner table. A young mother helped her daughter choose between 2 blueberry muffins. A farmer laughed quietly with the baker while carrying a basket filled with fresh eggs. The room hummed with gentle conversation and easy smiles. It felt less like a business and more like the village's living room. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair gathered into a loose braid. She wore a flour-dusted apron and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years caring for others. The moment she saw Thomas, her face brightened. "You're late." Thomas placed a hand over his heart in mock surprise. "I was delayed by important business." "Oh?" "I found a traveler." Martha's kind brown eyes shifted toward Oliver. "So you're the one?" Oliver blinked. "The one?" She smiled warmly. "The valley has been expecting someone new." Before Oliver could ask what she meant, she extended both hands across the counter. "I'm Martha." "Oliver?" She shook his hand with surprising warmth. "Welcome to Everpine." There was nothing formal about the greeting. Nothing rehearsed. Yet Oliver felt genuinely welcomed in a way he had rarely experienced before. Without asking what they wanted, Martha disappeared into the kitchen. A few moments later, she returned carrying a wooden tray, 2 thick slices of still warm apple bread, fresh butter, wildflower honey, and 2 steaming mugs of tea. Oliver reached for his wallet. Martha gently waved the idea away. "Not today. I couldn't. You've only just arrived." She smiled. "In Everpine, nobody pays for their first meal." Thomas grinned. "I've been trying to convince visitors of that for 30 years. They usually stop arguing after the first bite." Oliver laughed softly. He broke off a piece of bread. The crust crackled gently. Inside, the loaf was impossibly soft, filled with tender apple pieces, cinnamon, walnuts, and just enough sweetness to make every bite feel comforting rather than indulgent. He closed his eyes for a moment. It tasted like autumn, like warmth, like memories he hadn't realized he still carried. Martha watched his expression with quiet satisfaction. "Better than city bread?" Oliver's smile. "That's not even a fair comparison. As the afternoon passed, villagers came and went. Each greeted Martha by name. Some stayed only long enough to buy a loaf of bread. Others lingered over tea, exchanging stories about gardens, weather, grandchildren, and the approaching harvest festival. Oliver noticed something unusual. Martha remembered every detail. She asked one elderly man whether his knee was feeling better. She reminded a young woman to drink more tea while recovering from a cold. She slipped an extra pastry into a little boy's basket because it was his birthday. She never seemed to forget anyone. Thomas leaned closer. "I told you." "Told me what?" "She knows every story in Everpine." Almost as if she had heard him, Martha looked up. "I know enough." She smiled. "The rest belongs to the people living it." Later that afternoon, the bakery grew quieter. Only the ticking of a wall clock and the gentle crackling of the stone fireplace filled the room. Martha carried another pot of tea to their table. "You'll need somewhere to stay?" Oliver nodded. I was hoping to find a small inn. There is one. She paused thoughtfully. But Thomas raised an eyebrow. Oh? The attic room above the bakery has been empty since spring. Oliver looked up. You rent rooms? Sometimes. Mostly to travelers who look as though they need more than a bed. Oliver smiled awkwardly. Do I look like that? Martha answered with gentle honesty. You look tired. Not physically. The kind of tired that settled quietly inside a person after carrying too much for too long. Oliver didn't know how to respond, because she was right. That evening, Martha showed him the room. A narrow staircase led to a cozy attic beneath the sloping roof. The room was simple. A wooden bed, a writing desk beside a window, a bookshelf holding a handful of well-loved novels, a rocking chair facing the valley, pressed wild flowers framed upon the walls. The window overlooked Everpine's rooftops, where evening light painted the chimneys in shades of amber and rose. Beyond them stretched the endless pine forest. Peaceful, silent, almost timeless. Martha placed an old brass key in Oliver's hand. Stay as long as you need. He looked at the key. Thank you. She smiled. Everyone arrives here carrying something. What did you carry when you first came? Martha looked out towards the forest. A broken heart. She smiled again. And this valley taught me how to mend it. With that, she quietly closed the door behind her. Night settled gently over Everpine. From his attic window, Oliver watched lanterns begin to glow, one by one, throughout the village. The church bell rang softly in the distance. Somewhere below, Martha began preparing dough for tomorrow's bread. The rhythmic sound of kneading echoed faintly through the wooden floor. It was strangely comforting. Oliver opened his notebook. For several minutes, he simply stared at the blank page. Then, slowly, he wrote, Perhaps peace isn't a place. Perhaps it's the people who quietly help you find yourself again. He set down his pen and looked toward the dark outline of the pine forest. Far beyond the trees, a single warm light flickered for just a moment. Then it disappeared. Oliver frowned. No houses stood in that part of the forest. So who, or what, had lit a lantern there? Oliver woke before dawn to the gentle rhythm of someone kneading bread below his room. The sound rose through the old wooden floor in steady, patient motions. Push, fold, turn, pause. It was strangely comforting, almost like the slow beating of a peaceful heart. For a few moments, he remained beneath the warm quilt, listening as the village awakened around him. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the bakery. A window opened across the street. The distant murmur of the stream drifted through the cool morning air. Then came the familiar scent of fresh bread. Oliver smiled. He had spent years waking to alarms, traffic, and hurried footsteps in apartment hallways. Here, the morning seemed to arrive by invitation rather than interruption. After dressing, he made his way downstairs. The bakery kitchen was already alive with quiet activity. Martha stood at a long wooden table dusted with flour, shaping loaves with practiced hands. Warm light from hanging lanterns filled the room, while the large stone oven glowed softly in the corner. Without looking up, she said, "Good morning, Oliver." He blinked. "You didn't even hear me." "I heard the third step creak." Oliver laughed. "The third one? It has announced every visitor for the last 42 years. She placed another loaf onto a baking tray. I've never found a reason to fix it. Breakfast was simple but unforgettable. Still warm bread, fresh butter, forest blackberry jam. a slice of sharp mountain cheese, and tea scented with wild mint. Oliver ate slowly, savoring each bite. "This is the best breakfast I've had in years." Martha poured more tea. Food tastes different when nobody is rushing. He looked out the kitchen window. The village was beginning to stir. Children walked toward the little schoolhouse, carrying satchels nearly as large as themselves. A shepherd guided a small flock of sheep along a grassy lane. Shopkeepers swept fallen pine needles from their doorsteps. Everyone greeted one another with easy smiles. It felt less like a routine and more like a shared ritual. Just as Oliver finished his tea, the bakery bell chimed. Thomas stepped inside, carrying a small wooden box beneath one arm. "I hope I'm not interrupting breakfast." "You've interrupted your own," Martha replied, sliding a cinnamon roll toward him. "I knew there was a reason I came." He accepted it with a grin before turning to Oliver. "I have somewhere I'd like to take you." "Where?" "The library." Oliver looked surprised. "There's a library in a village this small?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "My dear boy, every place has stories. The wise ones simply build houses for them." The village library stood at the edge of a quiet square, shaded by towering pines. Unlike the surrounding cottages, it was built almost entirely of weathered stone. Its roof was steep, its windows tall and arched, and ivy climbed nearly every wall. An old bronze bell hung above the entrance, green with age. Carved into the stone above the heavy oak doors were the words, "Memory keeps what time forgets." Oliver paused beneath the inscription. "It feels older than the rest of the village." Thomas nodded. "It is. No one knows exactly how old." Inside, the library was cool and peaceful. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting patches of blue, amber, and emerald across the wooden floor. Towering bookshelves stretched toward the ceiling. Thousands of books filled the room, leather-bound journals, ancient maps, pressed botanical collections, handwritten family histories, shelves devoted entirely to birds, forests, stars, and forgotten folklore. The faint scent of paper, cedar, and beeswax lingered in the air. Oliver turned slowly in place. "I've never seen anything like this," a quiet voice answered from somewhere among the shelves. "Neither had I." A man stepped into the light. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with neatly combed dark hair, lightly touched by grey at the temples. Round spectacles rested on his nose, and a dark green cardigan hung comfortably over a crisp white shirt. He carried 3 books, balanced effortlessly in one hand. His calm grey eyes studied Oliver with quiet curiosity. Thomas smiled. "Oliver, meet Samuel, the guardian of every forgotten thought in Everpine." Samuel sighed with amused patience. "I've asked you not to introduce me that way. And yet it remains true." The two men exchanged the sort of smile shared by old friends. Samuel offered his hand. "Welcome." Oliver shook it. "It's beautiful here." Samuel glanced around the library. "I've always believed libraries should feel like forests." Oliver looked puzzled. "Forests? They both grow quietly. They both reward patience. And neither reveals all of its secrets at once." Samuel led them between towering shelves. As they walked, Oliver noticed that every book seemed carefully repaired. None looked neglected. Even the oldest volumes had been lovingly preserved. "You've restored all these?" Samuel nodded. "Books deserve long lives." He gently ran a hand across the spine of an ancient journal. "So do memories." They stopped before a locked glass cabinet near the back of the library. Inside rested several weathered leather journals tied with faded ribbons. Oliver noticed that none of them had titles. "What are those?" Samuel hesitated. "The Founders' Journals. The oldest written records in Everpine. Can anyone read them?" "Not anymore." "Why not?" Samuel looked thoughtfully at the cabinet. "Some pages are written in a language no one fully understands. Others," he paused, "seem to have disappeared." "Disappeared?" "They were here a century ago." "They're gone now?" Oliver frowned. "Stolen?" Samuel slowly shook his head. "We don't know." A quiet silence settled over the room. Outside, the wind whispered through the ancient pine trees. Somewhere above them, the library's old clock ticked softly. Samuel unlocked the cabinet. From inside, he carefully removed a single journal bound in dark green leather. Its cover was faded with age. No title, no author's name, only a small symbol pressed into the leather. A pine tree enclosed within a perfect circle. Oliver stared at it. Something about the symbol felt strangely familiar. "I've seen that before." Thomas and Samuel exchanged a quick glance. Samuel looked back at Oliver. "Where?" Oliver frowned, trying to remember. "This morning?" "No." He closed his eyes. "Yesterday. The wooden sign at the entrance to Everpine. The same symbol was carved into one corner." Samuel's calm expression changed almost imperceptibly. Thomas folded his arms. "I thought you might notice." Oliver looked between them. "What does it mean?" Neither man answered immediately. Finally, Samuel spoke. "It is older than the village itself. And according to our oldest records," he gently opened the journal, "it marks the beginning of a promise." Just then, something slipped from between the journal's brittle pages. A folded piece of yellowed parchment drifted silently onto the floor. No one had noticed it there before. The folded parchment landed soundlessly on the old wooden floor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The library seemed to hold its breath. Even the ticking of the ancient clock felt slower. Oliver bent down first. "Careful," Samuel said gently. "The paper may be older than any of us." Oliver paused and nodded. Instead of unfolding it himself, he lifted it carefully with both hands and passed it to Samuel. The librarian examined the brittle edges. "The parchment wasn't placed here recently," he murmured. "The folds have been undisturbed for decades." Thomas leaned closer. "Can you open it?" Samuel carried it to a wide oak table near the window, where the morning light was brightest. With slow, practiced movements, he unfolded the fragile sheet. A hand-drawn map appeared, or at least part of one. Most of the ink had faded into soft brown lines, but several landmarks remained visible. A winding river, a circle of pine trees, a stone tower sketched on a distant hill. Near the bottom of the page was the same symbol Oliver had noticed before, a pine tree enclosed within a perfect circle. Beneath it, written in elegant, faded handwriting, were only 7 words. "When spring remembers, the valley will answer." Oliver read the sentence twice. "It sounds like a riddle." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Many of the Founders' writings do." Thomas scratched his beard. "My grandfather used to say the Founders rarely wrote instructions." "What did they write?" "Invitations." For the next hour, the three of them searched through several old reference books. Samuel compared the handwriting with other journals. Thomas studied the faded drawing of the tower. Oliver copied the map carefully into his notebook. Yet none of them found an explanation. Finally, Samuel closed the last book with a quiet sigh. I don't believe we're meant to solve this today. Oliver smiled. You're surprisingly comfortable with unanswered questions. Samuel returned the smile. A librarian learns that every book has its own pace. As they stepped outside, the village square had come fully to life. Children laughed beneath the maple trees. A violinist played a gentle melody near the fountain. Two elderly women exchanged baskets of fresh vegetables while discussing tomorrow's weather, as though they had known it all their lives. Oliver noticed something. No one seemed to own much, yet everyone appeared content. He found himself wondering when he had last seen so many genuinely peaceful faces. Thomas looked toward the eastern edge of the valley. Our next stop. Oliver followed his gaze. Beyond the cottages stretched open meadows filled with late autumn wildflowers. Farther away, nestled against the forest, stood a small stone cottage surrounded by an astonishing garden. Even from this distance, patches of lavender, sage, rosemary, foxglove, calendula, and dozens of unfamiliar plants painted the landscape with soft colors. Thomas smiled. That's Evelyn's place. The herbalist, the gardener, the healer, the botanist. He chuckled. She insists they're all different jobs. A narrow footpath wound through the meadow. Butterflies drifted lazily between clusters of wild asters. Honeybees hummed from flower to flower despite the cool air. Oliver walked slowly, taking in every detail. I've never seen so many herbs growing together. Thomas nodded. Evelyn knows the language of plants. Oliver looked at him. The language. Thomas only smiled. You'll see. The cottage garden was unlike anything Oliver had imagined. Every plant seemed to have its own carefully chosen place. Tall herbs sheltered delicate flowers from the wind. Stone paths curved naturally between raised beds. Small wooden signs identified each plant in elegant handwriting. A shallow pond reflected the sky, surrounded by water mint and white lilies. Birds hopped fearlessly among the branches. Even the butterflies seemed unusually calm. Near the center of the garden knelt a young woman, gently brushing soil from the roots of a newly planted herb. She wore a simple linen dress beneath a green apron, and her chestnut hair was loosely tied back with a faded blue ribbon. Without looking up, she spoke. You brought someone? Thomas grinned. I did. I heard 3 sets of footsteps. She stood, dusting the earth from her hands. Her eyes were a soft shade of green, clear and attentive, as though they noticed details most people overlooked. You must be Oliver. He blinked. How did you know? She smiled. Thomas always walks a little slower when he's showing Everpine to someone new. Thomas laughed. I've become predictable. A little. Evelyn offered Oliver her hand. Welcome. Her handshake was gentle but confident. I've heard about your arrival. Oliver looked surprised. I've only been here since yesterday. In Everpine, Evelyn said with quiet amusement. News travels more quickly than the river. She led them deeper into the garden. As they walked, she occasionally paused to touch a leaf or remove a faded blossom. Every movement felt natural, almost affectionate. Oliver watched with curiosity. You care for each plant individually. They're all different. So are people. She knelt beside a small patch of lavender. This one thrives in poor soil. She pointed toward another plant growing nearby. And this one would die if planted in the same place. Oliver nodded. I suppose people are like that. They are. Some grow best with company. Others need quiet. Neither is wrong. Her words settled gently in his mind. Near the back of the garden stood an enormous pine tree. Its trunk was wider than 3 people standing side by side. Its branches stretched high above the cottage, casting cool shade across the earth. Oliver looked up in amazement. "How old is it?" Evelyn rested one hand against the bark. "No one knows. The founders planted many pines. But this one," she smiled softly, "was already old when they arrived." Oliver stepped closer. Carved into the bark, almost hidden beneath moss, was a familiar symbol. A pine tree enclosed within a perfect circle. The same symbol from the journal. The same symbol on the village sign. He looked at Evelyn. "You know what this means, don't you?" She was quiet for a moment. "I know what the stories say." "And what do they say?" A breeze stirred the ancient branches overhead. Sunlight flickered across the weathered carving. Evelyn's voice became almost a whisper. "They say every generation is asked one question." Oliver waited. "What question?" She met his eyes. "What is worth protecting, even if no one remembers why?" Before Oliver could answer, a single pine cone fell from the great tree and landed softly at his feet. Evelyn looked at it, her expression suddenly thoughtful. "That's unusual." "Why?" She bent to pick it up. "Because this tree..." She turned the pine cone slowly in her hands. "Hasn't dropped a single cone since last spring." Spring. Evelyn turned the pine cone over in her hands, as though she expected it to reveal something hidden. It was larger than an ordinary pine cone. Its scales tightly closed despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. Fine streaks of silver gray ran along its edges, giving it a faint shimmer whenever the light caught it. Thomas stepped closer. "I haven't seen one like that in years." Evelyn nodded. "Neither have I." Oliver looked from one of them to the other. "Is there something unusual about it?" Evelyn smiled gently. "In Everpine, unusual doesn't always mean important." She slipped the pine cone into the pocket of her apron. "But sometimes it does." Before Oliver could ask another question, the clear sound of a bell echoed across the valley. One ring, then another, then 3 more in slow succession. Thomas tilted his head, listening. "That's the chapel bell." "What does it mean?" Oliver asked. "The harvest festival begins tomorrow." As they walked back toward the village, Everpine seemed to have changed. Not dramatically, subtly. Ladders leaned against cottages, as neighbors hung strings of dried flowers and evergreen branches above their doors. Children painted wooden lanterns in shades of amber, crimson, and forest green. Long tables were being carried into the village square. Bundles of wheat and baskets of late apples stood beside every doorway. Oliver noticed that everyone seemed quietly excited, not rushed, simply joyful. "It's beautiful," he said. Thomas smiled. "The harvest festival isn't our biggest celebration." "It isn't?" "No. It's simply everyone's favorite." The village square buzzed with gentle activity. Near the fountain, several musicians tuned violins, a cello, and a weathered flute. A group of teenagers carefully strung paper lanterns between 2 ancient maple trees. At the edge of the square, Martha supervised 3 children who were enthusiastically decorating the bakery windows with autumn leaves. When she noticed Oliver, she waved. "Perfect timing," Oliver laughed. "For what?" She handed him a basket filled with small white candles. "For helping." Within minutes, Oliver found himself climbing a short wooden ladder. He carefully placed candles inside dozens of glass lanterns hanging beneath the bakery's porch. Beside him worked a cheerful little girl with freckles scattered across her nose. She couldn't have been older than 8. "I'm Lily," she announced proudly. "Oliver." She studied him with complete seriousness. "So, are you staying?" Oliver hesitated. "I haven't decided." Lily nodded, as though considering something important. "You probably will." "You sound very sure." She shrugged. "Everyone says they're only visiting." Then she skipped away before he could ask what she meant. As evening approached, the sky softened into shades of peach and lavender. Golden light spilled across the rooftops. The village square slowly transformed. Lanterns glowed one by one. The fountain reflected hundreds of tiny lights. Fresh bread, roasted vegetables, herb soup, apple pies, honey cakes, and warm cider covered the long wooden tables. The air filled with the comforting sounds of laughter and quiet conversation. No speeches, no announcements. The festival simply began. Oliver found himself seated beside Thomas, Martha, Evelyn, and Samuel. For the first time since arriving, all 5 of them were together. Martha passed around fresh rolls, still warm from the oven. Samuel carefully poured cider into small ceramic cups. Thomas carved roasted squash with remarkable precision. Evelyn added handfuls of fresh herbs to nearly every dish. Oliver smiled. "You've all known each other for a long time." Thomas chuckled. "Long enough to finish one another's stories. And occasionally each other's sentences," Martha added. Samuel looked amused. "It happens more often than I'd like to admit." The table erupted in quiet laughter. Oliver laughed with them. To his surprise, it didn't feel like he was sitting among strangers anymore. After dinner, the musicians began to play. The melody was simple, gentle, almost nostalgic. Couples danced beneath the lanterns. Children chased glowing fireflies near the fountain. Older villagers clapped softly in rhythm with the music. Oliver stood near the edge of the square, watching. Evelyn joined him. "You don't dance?" "I'm not very good." She smiled. "Neither is half the village." He laughed. "Then why do they keep dancing?" "Because no one here is trying to impress anyone." Oliver watched the dancers again. She was right. No one cared about perfect steps. They were simply enjoying the moment. Perhaps that was enough. As darkness settled fully over Everpine, the music faded. One by one, villagers lifted their lanterns. Without a word, everyone began walking toward the ancient pine forest. Oliver looked at Thomas. "Where are we going?" "The oldest tree." The path wound beneath towering pines, illuminated only by hundreds of warm lanterns. The forest was silent, except for footsteps and the whisper of wind through the branches. After several minutes, the procession reached a vast clearing. At its center stood the largest pine Oliver had ever seen. It was even older than the one in Evelyn's garden. Its trunk was enormous. Its branches disappeared into the night sky. Lantern light flickered across bark marked by centuries. The villagers formed a wide circle around the tree. No one spoke. No prayers were offered. No ceremony was led. They simply stood together in silence. After a full minute, Martha quietly whispered, "Thank you." Others repeated the words, not loudly, just enough for the forest to hear. Oliver found himself whispering them too, though he wasn't entirely sure why. As the villagers slowly returned toward the village, Oliver lingered for a moment beneath the great pine. He looked up into its endless branches. Something caught his eye. High above, almost hidden among the needles, was a small object reflecting the lantern light. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a bird. It looked like a tiny metal bell hanging from one of the highest branches. Oliver frowned. He blinked. The object was gone. Only darkness remained. When he mentioned it to Evelyn on the walk home, she became unusually quiet. After a long pause, she said softly, "I've heard stories about that." "What kind of stories?" She looked back once toward the ancient tree before answering. "The stories say the bell only appears when Everpine is preparing to remember something it has forgotten." Oliver glanced over his shoulder toward the silent forest. For the second time since arriving in the valley, he had the unmistakable feeling that Everpine was not merely a place. It was watching, and somehow it already knew his name. The morning after the harvest festival arrived wrapped in a soft blanket of mist. From the attic window above Martha's bakery, Oliver watched the valley slowly emerge from the pale grey veil. First came the rooftops, then the chimneys, then the tops of the ancient pines as the sun climbed quietly above the eastern ridge. The lanterns from the previous evening still hung across the village square. Most had gone dark. A few continued to glow faintly, their candles nearly spent. It looked as though the festival had left behind a gentle reminder that joy did not disappear all at once. It simply faded slowly, making room for another day. Downstairs, the bakery was unusually quiet. Only Martha was awake. She stood by the kitchen window, cradling a warm mug of tea as she watched the mist drift across the valley. "Good morning," Oliver said. She turned with a smile. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep much." "The festival?" Oliver nodded. "And I kept thinking about that tree." Martha was silent for a moment. "The oldest pine has that effect on people." She placed a fresh loaf on the table. "It reminds us how small one lifetime really is." After breakfast, Oliver made his way to the library. The village still felt peaceful after the celebration. Children swept flower petals from the square. Neighbors folded long wooden tables and carried them back into storage. The musicians laughed together as they packed away their instruments. No one seemed tired, only grateful. When Oliver reached the library, the heavy oak door was already open. Samuel stood inside with several books stacked beneath one arm. "I was hoping you'd come." Oliver smiled. "Were you?" Samuel nodded. "I've been thinking about yesterday's parchment." "So have I. I found something during the night." He led Oliver toward a small reading room tucked behind the main library. Unlike the grand hall, this room contained only one table, 2 chairs, and a narrow window overlooking the pine forest. Waiting on the table was another journal. Its leather cover was faded, almost white with age. Unlike the founder's journals, it bore no symbol, no title, no date, no author's name. Oliver looked puzzled. "It belongs to no one." "Or perhaps," Samuel said thoughtfully, "to everyone." He opened the first page. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar. There was no signature, only a single sentence. "If these pages are ever found, let them belong to the one who still knows how to wonder." Oliver read the line again. "It doesn't sound like a history book." "It isn't?" Samuel carefully turned another page. "The journal tells stories." "What kind of stories?" "Ordinary ones." Oliver looked surprised. "Ordinary?" Samuel smiled. The founders believed ordinary lives were worth remembering. The pages were filled with quiet moments. A baker teaching her son how to knead bread. A shepherd rescuing a lost lamb during a snowstorm. A little girl planting an apple tree with her grandfather. A carpenter repairing a broken chair instead of building a new one because, as the journal put it, some things deserve another chance. Oliver found himself smiling. There were no battles, no kings, no grand adventures, only people, living, loving, growing older. It feels, Oliver searched for the right word, real. Samuel nodded. The greatest histories often do. As they continued reading, Oliver noticed something unusual. The entries covered nearly 200 years. Yet, the handwriting never changed. Every page looked as though it had been written by the same person. He frowned. "That's impossible." Samuel looked up. "You noticed? One person couldn't have written this. They couldn't. So who did?" Samuel gently closed the journal. "We don't know." The room grew quiet. Outside, a pair of ravens crossed the pale morning sky. Oliver looked once more at the worn leather cover. No author. The same handwriting. 200 years. Samuel folded his hands. "There are many theories." "What do you believe?" The librarian considered the question carefully. "I believe every generation added to the journal. But," he tapped the page lightly, "I cannot explain why every hand looks the same." A sudden knock echoed through the library. Thomas stepped inside carrying a narrow wooden box. "I thought I'd find you two buried beneath old books." Samuel smiled. "An accurate description." Thomas placed the box on the table. "I've brought something." Inside lay several old brass keys. Some were no larger than Oliver's thumb. Others were long and beautifully carved. Oliver picked one up. "What do they open?" Thomas looked toward Samuel. "The rooms beneath the library." Oliver blinked. "There are rooms under the library." Samuel nodded. "A few." "You never mentioned them?" "You never asked." Thomas laughed quietly. That's Samuel's favorite answer. Samuel selected one small iron key from the box. "I think it's time." Oliver looked at him. "Time for what?" The librarian walked to the far corner of the reading room. There, almost hidden behind a tall bookshelf, stood a narrow wooden door Oliver hadn't noticed before. Samuel unlocked it. The old hinges sighed softly as the door opened. A cool breath of air drifted upward from the darkness below. Stone steps disappeared into the earth. Oliver felt a strange mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Thomas picked up a lantern from the wall and lit it. Its warm glow pushed back the shadows. Samuel looked at Oliver with a calm smile. "Would you like to see where Everpine keeps the stories that were never finished?" Oliver took a slow breath, then nodded. Together, the three of them descended into the quiet darkness beneath the library, unaware that the answers they sought would lead them not only into Everpine's forgotten past, but also toward a mystery that had been waiting for someone like Oliver to uncover. The stone steps curved gently downward, disappearing into cool darkness. Samuel carried the lantern in front of him, its warm golden light dancing across walls that had stood undisturbed for centuries. Tiny crystals embedded in the stone caught the light like distant stars, while the faint scent of old earth, cedar, and beeswax filled the narrow passage. Oliver ran his fingertips lightly along the wall. The stones were smooth, not from careful carving, from countless hands that had touched them over many generations. "How old is this place?" he asked quietly. Samuel glanced over his shoulder. No one knows for certain. The oldest records mention these rooms as though they already existed. Thomas smiled. In Everpine, some things have a habit of being older than their stories. The staircase ended before a heavy oak door reinforced with dark iron bands. Unlike the doors upstairs, this one bore no lock, only the familiar symbol, a pine tree enclosed within a perfect circle. Samuel rested his hand against the wood. My grandfather always paused here. Oliver looked at him. Why? He believed every story deserved to be entered with respect. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Samuel slowly pushed the door open. The room beyond was larger than Oliver had imagined. Shelves carved directly into the stone walls stretched from floor to ceiling. Instead of books, they held hundreds of carefully labeled wooden boxes. Some were polished walnut, others were rough pine. Each bore a small brass plaque. Names, dates, places, entire lives reduced to a few simple words. Oliver stepped closer to one shelf. Anna Birch, 1902 to 1987, another. The Great Winter, 1849, another. Letters never sent. He frowned. These aren't books. Samuel smiled softly. No. They're memories. Thomas lifted one of the smaller boxes and placed it gently on a long oak table. Inside rested a collection of ordinary objects. A child's marble, a silver button, a faded photograph, a dried sprig of lavender tied with blue thread. Oliver looked puzzled. What are these? Samuel answered. Whenever someone in Everpine passes away, their family chooses a handful of objects that tell their story. No jewels, no fortunes. Only the things that quietly mattered. Oliver picked up the marble. Its smooth blue surface reflected the lantern light. It seems so simple. Thomas nodded. The important things usually are. They wandered slowly through the chamber. Every shelf held another life, another family, another forgotten kindness waiting to be remembered. Oliver noticed that many boxes contained handwritten notes. Some were only a single sentence. Others filled several pages. He unfolded one carefully. She always planted sunflowers where people believed nothing could grow. Another read, he repaired clocks, but he never hurried anyone. A third simply said, she laughed with her whole heart. Oliver swallowed quietly. No accomplishments, no titles, only the qualities people hoped would outlive them. It feels, he whispered, beautiful. Samuel nodded. I've always thought so. At the very back of the chamber stood one shelf unlike all the others. It contained only 5 boxes. No names, only symbols, each marked with the pine tree enclosed within a circle. Oliver looked toward Samuel. Who do these belong to? The librarian became unusually thoughtful. We don't know. No records mention them. They've always been here. Thomas folded his arms. My grandfather told me never to open them. Oliver blinked. You've never looked inside? Thomas shook his head. Some promises survive because people keep them. For several quiet minutes, they simply stood before the mysterious shelf. Then, Oliver noticed something. One of the boxes wasn't fully closed. Its lid sat slightly crooked, leaving the narrowest gap. Samuel frowned. That's odd. He carefully lifted the box from the shelf. Dust covered every surface, except the edge of the lid. Someone or something had touched it recently. Thomas looked genuinely puzzled. I've never seen that before. Samuel slowly opened the lid. Inside lay only one object, a small brass compass. Its glass was slightly scratched with age, but otherwise it appeared untouched. Oliver leaned closer. The needle wasn't pointing north. It was turning, slowly, silently, again and again, always settling toward the east, toward the ancient forest. Samuel's calm expression faded. "I don't understand," Thomas whispered almost to himself. "My grandfather said—" "What did he say?" Oliver asked. "He said if the compass ever moved again—" Thomas looked toward the ceiling, as though he could somehow see the forest above them. The valley's oldest promise would no longer be sleeping. The room fell silent. Even the lantern flame seemed strangely still. Then, without warning, a faint bell rang somewhere far above. One clear note, soft, distant. Oliver froze. "The chapel?" Samuel slowly shook his head. "No." Thomas's face had grown pale. That sound, it came from the forest. Oliver felt a chill run through him. He remembered the tiny bell he thought he had seen hanging in the branches of the oldest pine during the harvest festival. He had believed it was only his imagination. Now, he wasn't so sure. Samuel gently closed the box and held the compass in both hands. "We should go." Oliver looked at him. "Why?" Samuel met his eyes. "Because I think—" He paused, listening as the distant bell rang once more. Everpine has just begun telling us its oldest story. The bell did not ring again, yet its single note lingered in Oliver's mind long after the three of them climbed back into the library. The morning sunlight, pouring through the stained glass windows, felt strangely different now. Nothing in the village had changed. Children still laughed outside. A cart loaded with pumpkins rolled across the square. Someone played a cheerful tune on a violin near the fountain. Everything was exactly as it had been. And yet, Oliver felt as though he had stepped into a different Everpine. Not a different place, a deeper one. Samuel locked the narrow door behind them and slipped the iron key into his pocket. "For now," he said quietly, "let's keep what we found beneath the library between us." Oliver nodded. "You think it would worry people?" Samuel looked toward the window. "No. It would awaken old questions." Thomas rested his weathered hands on the reading table. "And questions have a habit of growing faster than answers." The three men spread the faded parchment across the oak table once again. Beside it lay the strange compass. Its needle continued to point steadily east. Samuel frowned. "It hasn't moved once since we left the chamber." Thomas traced the river drawn on the old map with his finger. "I've walked these valleys my entire life. I recognize the river and these hills." He pointed toward a faint sketch near the edge of the parchment. "But this, I've never seen." The drawing showed a narrow stone path leading toward a circle of ancient pines. Beyond them stood a tower. Not large, not grand, just a solitary watchtower overlooking the forest. Oliver looked up. "The tower, from the map." Samuel nodded slowly. "If it still exists." For the next several hours, books and maps covered nearly every inch of the table. Samuel searched through centuries of village records. Thomas compared hand-drawn sketches with old survey maps. Oliver copied symbols into his notebook. Most of the documents agreed on one thing. The eastern forest had changed remarkably little over the centuries. The rivers still followed the same paths. The hills remained untouched. The oldest pines still marked the valley's edge. Yet, no map showed a watchtower. It was as though it had never existed. Just after noon, Samuel climbed a rolling ladder to the highest shelf in the library. From the very back, he removed a long leather tube sealed with faded red wax. He climbed down carefully. "I almost forgot this." Thomas smiled. "I've never seen you forget anything." Samuel adjusted his spectacles. "I said almost." He gently broke the brittle wax seal. Inside rested a beautifully preserved map, unlike any Oliver had seen before. Its paper was thick and cream-colored. The rivers shimmered faintly with blue ink. The forests were painted in soft shades of green. Even the mountains seemed alive. Across the top, elegant handwriting read, "Everpine Valley surveyed in the first spring." Oliver frowned. "The first spring?" Samuel nodded. "There isn't a year." The three of them leaned over the map. At first glance, it appeared almost identical to the modern valley. The village, the river, the meadows, the orchards. Everything seemed familiar. Then Oliver noticed something. Near the eastern forest, a tiny symbol, a pine tree enclosed within a perfect circle. His heartbeat quickened. There. Samuel followed his finger. The symbol stood alone among the trees. No words, no explanation. Only a faint, dotted trail leading deeper into the forest. Thomas whispered, "I've never noticed that before." Oliver compared the ancient map with the parchment they had found. Slowly, carefully. The rivers aligned. The hills matched. The dotted trail ended exactly where the old watchtower had been drawn. Samuel looked thoughtful. "The two maps belong together." Oliver nodded. "They're showing the same place." Thomas folded his arms. "But why hide it?" No one answered. A sudden gust of wind swept through the library. Several loose papers fluttered from the table. One landed at Oliver's feet. It was a page from an old botanical journal. Evelyn's neat handwriting covered the margins. Across the center of the page was a detailed sketch of a rare forest flower. Below it she had written, "Only found where the oldest roots still remember." Oliver frowned. "What does that mean?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Ask Evelyn." The afternoon sun hung low when Oliver left the library carrying copies of both maps in his notebook. The village glowed beneath warm autumn light. Children skipped home from school. Martha waved from the bakery window, flour still dusting her apron. Thomas promised to visit again the next morning. Samuel remained behind, determined to search a few more forgotten records. Oliver wandered toward the eastern meadow, almost without thinking. The compass rested in his coat pocket. He hadn't intended to bring it. Yet somehow, when he had left the library, it had already been there. He stopped walking. Had Samuel handed it to him? Had Thomas? He honestly couldn't remember. He pulled it from his pocket. The brass surface was warm, far warmer than the cool autumn air. Its needle still pointed east, toward the forest. As Oliver reached Evelyn's garden, he found her kneeling beside the great pine, carefully trimming a cluster of lavender. She looked up before he spoke. "You found something?" Oliver smiled. "How did you know?" She glanced briefly toward his coat pocket. "The birds." He blinked. "The birds?" "They've been unusually quiet all afternoon." She stood slowly. "They only do that when the forest is listening." Oliver hesitated before taking the compass from his pocket. The moment Evelyn saw it, the warmth faded from her face. She did not look frightened. She looked as though she had been expecting this day for a very long time. "The compass of the east," she whispered. Oliver stared at her. "You know what it is?" Evelyn nodded once. "My grandmother told me stories about it when I was a child." She looked toward the dark line of ancient pines beyond her garden. "They always ended the same way." "What did she say?" Evelyn's voice was almost lost in the evening breeze. When the compass wakes, someone must walk the old path. She met Oliver's eyes. And according to every story, the path has never chosen the same traveler twice. For a long moment, neither Oliver nor Evelyn spoke. The compass rested quietly in Oliver's palm, its brass surface catching the last rays of the evening sun. The needle remained perfectly still, pointing toward the eastern forest. Oliver finally broke the silence. "You believe the stories?" Evelyn looked down at the compass before answering. "I believe stories survive for a reason. That doesn't mean every one of them is literally true." She smiled softly. "But it doesn't mean they're false either." A cool breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth. Somewhere high above, a flock of geese crossed the fading sky, flying south in a perfect V. "They know winter is coming," Evelyn said. Oliver followed the birds with his eyes. "So does the valley." That evening, the first frost settled over Everpine. Thin crystals formed along cottage roofs, sparkling beneath the moonlight like scattered stars. The villagers did not seem surprised. Children carefully covered flower beds with straw. Farmers stacked the last bundles of firewood beside their homes. Martha spent the evening baking extra loaves of bread, filling the bakery with comforting warmth. "The first frost always arrives quietly," she told Oliver as she slid another tray into the oven. "It reminds us that every season deserves preparing for." Oliver helped arrange fresh bread on the cooling racks. "You all seem to know exactly what to do." Martha laughed gently. "We've had many winters to practice." The following morning, Everpine awoke beneath a pale silver sky. The air felt colder, the wind softer. Oliver wrapped his scarf around his neck before stepping outside. He noticed something almost immediately. The compass had stopped moving. Its needle no longer pointed east. Instead, it rested perfectly still, pointing north, like any ordinary compass. Oliver frowned. Had everything yesterday simply been a coincidence? He slipped it into his pocket. Even so, he couldn't shake the feeling that it had changed something. Perhaps not the valley. Perhaps him. Later that morning, Samuel invited Oliver to help organize several shelves in the library. Snow clouds gathered beyond the mountains while they worked in comfortable silence. Samuel carefully repaired the torn spine of an old poetry collection. Oliver sorted journals by date. "You've been thinking?" Samuel observed without looking up. Oliver smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "It usually is." Oliver hesitated. "The compass." Samuel placed his brush aside. "What about it?" "This morning it behaved normally." Samuel nodded. "Sometimes unusual things choose ordinary moments to disappear." Oliver looked puzzled. "Doesn't that bother you?" "It used to." Samuel smiled faintly. "Then I realized mystery isn't the opposite of understanding." "What is it?" "The beginning of it." By afternoon, light snowflakes drifted gently across the valley. Not enough to cover the ground. Just enough to soften the rooftops and the branches of the ancient pines. Children ran laughing into the square, trying to catch the flakes before they melted. Thomas appeared outside the library, carrying a long wooden sled. "First snow," he grinned. "The children insist every year that I'm still young enough to race them." "And are you?" Oliver asked. Thomas laughed. "Absolutely not. That has never stopped me." The entire village seemed to step outside. Some swept the light snow from their porches. Others simply stood quietly, watching winter arrive. Oliver noticed how no one complained about the cold. Instead, They welcomed it, as though greeting an old friend. Evelyn walked through the square carrying baskets of dried herbs. "They'll keep everyone healthy through winter," she explained. Thomas accepted one gratefully. "You always know exactly how much we'll need." Evelyn smiled. "The plants usually tell me." Oliver laughed. "I still haven't figured out whether you're joking." "Neither have I." That evening, snow continued to fall. Slowly. Silently. Oliver returned to his attic room above the bakery. He lit the small oil lamp on the writing desk and opened his notebook. Instead of writing about the compass, or the ancient map, or the mysterious bell, he found himself writing about the people. Thomas laughing with the children, Martha slipping an extra loaf into an elderly widow's basket, Samuel repairing books long after sunset, Evelyn speaking to plants as though they were old friends. He paused. Perhaps that was Everpine's greatest secret. Not the hidden tower, not the forgotten promise, but the quiet way ordinary kindness became part of everyday life. He smiled and closed the notebook. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window. One landed gently on the glass, then another, and another, until the whole valley lay beneath a blanket of white. Just before Oliver went to bed, someone knocked softly on the bakery door below. It was well past sunset. Visitors were unusual at this hour. Martha answered. A voice spoke quietly, too quietly for Oliver to understand. A few moments later, he heard footsteps climbing the stairs. There was another gentle knock. "Oliver?" It was Samuel. Oliver opened the door. The librarian looked unusually serious. In his hands was the old map from the library. "I think we've made a mistake," Samuel said. Oliver's expression tightened. "What kind of mistake?" Samuel unfolded the map across the small writing desk. By the light of the oil lamp, he pointed towards the faded, dotted trail leading into the eastern forest. "I've been studying this all evening." "And?" Samuel took a slow breath. "We've been reading it upside down." Oliver frowned. "What?" Samuel turned the map 180 degrees. The rivers no longer seemed to flow toward the village. They flowed away from it. The mountains shifted. The forest changed shape. And in the lower corner of the map, hidden beneath a fold they had never fully opened, a second drawing appeared. It showed not one tower, but two. One standing, the other in ruins. Between them, someone had written a single sentence in faded ink. "One watches the valley. The other watches what must never leave it, must never leave it." Oliver stared at the newly revealed corner of the map. The words seemed almost too simple. One watches the valley. The other watches what must never leave it. The room fell silent. Outside, snow continued to drift past the attic window, covering rooftops and quiet streets in a soft blanket of white. Samuel traced the faded ink with one finger. "I've examined this map for nearly 20 years, and I never thought to unfold it completely." Oliver looked at him. "You couldn't have known?" Samuel smiled faintly. "That's the strange thing about old maps. They only reveal what someone thinks to ask." Neither of them slept much that night. Samuel returned to the library, carrying the map, determined to compare it with every historical record he could find. Oliver remained at the desk, his notebook lying open before him. Instead of writing, he watched the snowfall. The valley looked peaceful, untouched, almost suspended outside of time. Yet beneath that quiet beauty, he could feel something changing. Not dramatically, gradually, as though Everpine itself had begun remembering something long forgotten. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of pearl. The snowfall had stopped. The entire valley shimmered beneath fresh snow, every rooftop and pine branch glowing in the pale winter light. Oliver stepped outside. His boots sank gently into the powder. The cold air stung his cheeks, but it felt refreshing rather than harsh. Children were already building snowmen in the village square. Thomas was helping 2 brothers pull a wooden sled. Martha stood outside the bakery, laughing as she brushed snow from the window boxes. It was impossible to believe that only hours earlier he had been studying mysterious maps and forgotten towers. Everpine had a remarkable gift. It never allowed mystery to overshadow ordinary life. The two simply existed together. Oliver wandered toward the eastern meadow. The compass rested quietly in his pocket. He did not expect it to move. It didn't. Everything appeared perfectly normal, until he reached the edge of the meadow. There, where the open field met the ancient forest. He stopped. A line of footprints crossed the fresh snow. They emerged from the trees, crossed the meadow, then disappeared beneath another stand of pines farther north. Oliver frowned. Someone had walked through the valley before sunrise. He knelt beside the nearest print. It was deep, clear, and unlike any boot he had ever seen. The sole carried a strange pattern, tiny circles surrounding a single pine tree. The same symbol. Again. "You're not the first to notice them." Oliver turned. Evelyn stood several yards away, carrying a basket of dried herbs wrapped in wool. She walked toward the footprints without disturbing them. "You've seen these before?" Oliver asked. She nodded. 3 winters ago. And before that, she looked toward the forest. "My grandmother saw them when she was a little girl." Oliver stared. "The exact same pattern?" "The very same." He looked back at the snow. "But no one talks about them." "They do." Quietly. They followed the footprints together. Not too closely. Just enough to see where they led. The trail crossed a frozen stream, passed beneath towering pines, wound around enormous moss-covered boulders. Yet something about it felt unusual. Oliver noticed that no animal tracks crossed the prints. Not a single bird had landed near them. Even the rabbits seemed to have avoided the path. The forest itself felt respectfully distant. After nearly 20 minutes, the footprints ended. Abruptly. Not because the snow had melted. Not because the walker had turned around. They simply stopped. Oliver looked around in confusion. "There should be more." "There usually aren't," Evelyn replied quietly. He examined the final print. Beyond it lay untouched snow, stretching in every direction. No branches overhead. No rocks to leap onto. Nothing. It was as though whoever had been walking had simply vanished into the winter air. Oliver's eyes wandered across the clearing. Near the final footprint stood a weathered stone marker, almost completely hidden beneath snow and moss. It leaned slightly to one side, no larger than his waist. He brushed away the snow. The familiar symbol appeared once more. The pine tree enclosed within a perfect circle. Below it were 3 words carved so deeply that even time had failed to erase them. "Beyond here, listen." Oliver read them aloud. Evelyn smiled softly. The founders believed listening was sometimes wiser than searching. He laughed quietly. "Everyone in Everpine seems to speak in riddles." Not riddles. She looked around the silent forest. Reminders. They stood quietly for several minutes. The forest answered with nothing but the whisper of winter wind through ancient branches. Then, a faint sound drifted across the clearing. Tap, tap, Oliver looked toward the trees. "Did you hear that?" Evelyn nodded. "It isn't a woodpecker." The tapping came again, slow, steady, almost rhythmic, as though someone far away was striking wood against wood. Thomas's voice suddenly echoed in Oliver's memory. Wood remembers every hand that shapes it. The tapping stopped. Silence returned. When they finally reached the village, Samuel was waiting outside the library. His coat was still dusted with snow. He looked as though he had been searching for them. "I've found another record," he said without greeting. "What kind?" Oliver asked. Samuel held up a small leather notebook. It belonged to the last keeper of the Eastern Watchtower. Oliver's heartbeat quickened. "You found it?" Samuel nodded. "Only fragments survived." "What do they say?" Samuel opened the notebook carefully. Most of the pages were damaged. Some had faded beyond recognition. Others had been torn away long ago. Only one page remained completely intact. He handed it to Oliver. The final entry read, "The bell has not rung for 71 winters. If it ever rings again, do not follow the sound immediately. First, find the one who walks without leaving tomorrow behind." Oliver frowned. He looked up at Samuel. "What does that mean?" Samuel slowly shook his head. "I don't know." Before anyone could speak again, a gust of icy wind swept through the village square. A single sheet of paper slipped from the notebook and fluttered into the air. Oliver caught it before it reached the ground. Unlike the other pages, it contained no writing, only a carefully drawn portrait. A young man stood beside the Eastern Watchtower, smiling gently at the artist. Oliver felt the color drain from his face. The man in the drawing looked exactly like him, The portrait lay silently in Oliver's hands. Snowflakes drifted onto the paper before melting almost instantly. No one spoke. Samuel adjusted his glasses and looked again, as though expecting the image to change. It didn't. The resemblance was unmistakable. The young man had the same thoughtful eyes, the same dark hair. Even the small scar above his left eyebrow appeared in exactly the same place. Thomas finally broke the silence. "That's impossible." Oliver swallowed. "Perhaps it's only someone who looks like me." Samuel nodded slowly. "That would be the most reasonable explanation." But he looked down at the portrait again. "I've never liked ignoring difficult questions simply because they're difficult." They returned to the library. Not because anyone believed the building held an immediate answer, but because it had become the one place in Everpine where unanswered questions felt welcome. Samuel spread the portrait, the old map, and the founder's journal across the reading table. For more than an hour, they searched for anything that connected them. Nothing. No name, no date, no description. Only the silent drawing of a young man standing before the Eastern Watchtower. Oliver leaned back in his chair. "I feel as though the valley keeps giving us pieces of a puzzle." Thomas smiled faintly. "Perhaps it is. But someone forgot to include the picture on the box." That afternoon, the snowfall stopped completely. For the first time in days, patches of blue sky appeared between the clouds. Sunlight reflected brilliantly from the snow-covered hills. Evelyn arrived at the library, carrying a basket wrapped in thick wool. "I brought lunch." Thomas's eyes lit up. "Now we're making real progress." Inside the basket were warm vegetable soup, fresh bread, herb butter, roasted chestnuts, and slices of apple tart from Martha's bakery. They ate together beside the library window. Conversation drifted naturally from gardening to winter birds, from favorite books to childhood memories. Not once did anyone mention the portrait. Oliver noticed something. Whenever the mystery became too heavy, the people of Everpine instinctively returned to ordinary life. It wasn't avoidance, it was balance. After lunch, Evelyn unfolded a much smaller map from her basket. Unlike Samuel's ancient documents, this one was hand-drawn in colored pencil. "I made this when I was 12. Oliver smiled. "You mapped the forest?" "I tried." She pointed towards several circles. "These mark the oldest pine trees." Another symbol indicated a spring, then a rocky hillside. Finally, she frowned. "That's strange." "What is?" She touched one empty corner of the map. "I remember drawing something here. But it's gone." Oliver looked closer. Only faint pencil marks remained, almost as though someone had carefully erased part of the drawing. "What was it?" She closed her eyes, trying to remember. She hesitated. "I think it was a tower." The room fell silent once more. Thomas leaned forward. "You've never told us that." "I forgot." Samuel looked thoughtful. Or perhaps. He glanced toward the window. "You were meant to remember today." By late afternoon, they had made a decision. They would follow the old map. Not immediately. Not recklessly. Samuel insisted they prepare carefully. Thomas packed lanterns, ropes, and warm blankets. Evelyn gathered medicinal herbs, dried berries, and mountain tea. Martha filled a basket with enough bread and food for several days. When Oliver apologized for causing everyone so much trouble, Martha laughed warmly. "My dear," she placed another loaf into the basket. "In Everpine, helping one another isn't trouble. It's Tuesday." They agreed to leave the following morning. The weather forecast promised clear skies. Fresh snow would make the trail easier to follow. That evening, the village settled into its familiar rhythm. Lanterns glowed behind frosted windows. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. Children's laughter slowly faded as families gathered indoors. Oliver stood outside the bakery for a long while, looking toward the eastern forest. The mountains beyond were already turning blue beneath the approaching night. He wondered how many generations had stood exactly where he was now, looking toward the same forest, wondering the same things. Before returning upstairs, he noticed someone approaching along the snowy lane. An elderly woman, wrapped in a dark green cloak, walked slowly with the help of a carved wooden cane. Oliver had never seen her before. She stopped beside him and smiled. "You must be Oliver." He nodded politely. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met." "We haven't." Her voice was gentle, almost musical. "But I knew your grandfather." Oliver stared. "My grandfather?" "Yes. He visited Everpine once, many years ago." Oliver's heart skipped a beat. "My grandfather never mentioned this place." The woman looked toward the distant forest. "Some people leave with memories. Others leave with silence." Before Oliver could ask another question, she reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small wooden token. It was smooth with age. Carved into its surface was the familiar symbol of the pine tree within a circle. On the back were 4 carefully carved words. "Return what is remembered." Oliver looked up. "What does this mean?" But the old woman had already begun walking away through the softly falling snow. He called after her. "Wait!" She paused without turning around. "There is one thing you should know." Oliver waited. "The watchtower isn't dangerous." She looked toward the ancient forest one last time. "It is lonely. Then she continued down the quiet lane until the evening mist slowly swallowed her from view. Oliver remained standing in the snow, the wooden token resting in his hand. For reasons he couldn't explain, the old woman's final words stayed with him far longer than the mystery of the tower itself. Because loneliness was something he understood all too well. And somewhere deep in the eastern forest, a forgotten watchtower had been waiting in silence for generations. Oliver barely slept that night. The old woman's words echoed through his thoughts. The watchtower isn't dangerous. It is lonely. He had expected warnings about hidden dangers, ancient curses, or forgotten guardians. Instead, she had spoken of loneliness. It seemed like an unusual thing to fear, or perhaps an unusual thing to pity. Before sunrise, Everpine was still wrapped in darkness. Only a handful of lights glowed behind frosted windows. The bakery, as always, was awake. Martha was placing fresh loaves onto cooling racks when Oliver came downstairs. She smiled without looking up. "I thought you'd leave before breakfast." "I almost did." "I'm glad you didn't." She sliced a warm loaf and spread it generously with butter and wildflower honey. "No one should begin a long walk on an empty stomach." Oliver laughed. "I'm beginning to think every important lesson in Everpine involves bread. It helps people listen." She handed him a small cloth bundle. Inside were sandwiches, dried apples, roasted hazelnuts, and a tiny jar of blackberry jam. "For later?" "Thank you. Bring the basket back." Oliver smiled. "I will. And yourself." Her eyes softened. "Bring yourself back too." By the time the first pale light reached the mountain peaks, the others were waiting in the village square. Thomas wore a thick wool coat and carried a walking stick he had carved himself many years earlier. Samuel had packed notebooks, maps, and a leather satchel filled with carefully wrapped journals. Evelyn adjusted the straps of her small backpack, where bundles of herbs hung neatly from one side. Snow covered the square in an untouched white blanket. No one hurried. No one spoke very much. The morning itself seemed to ask for quiet. They left Everpine just as the church bell rang once. The eastern path wound gently upward through snow-covered meadows before disappearing beneath towering pine trees. As soon as they entered the forest, the world changed. The wind grew softer. The air smelled of pine resin and frozen earth. Every sound became clearer. The crunch of boots in fresh snow, the call of a distant raven, the occasional whisper of snow slipping from heavy branches. Oliver noticed something else. The forest felt awake, not in a frightening way. More like an old friend opening one eye to see who had arrived. For nearly an hour, they walked without speaking much. Thomas occasionally pointed out animal tracks. "Fox." He nodded toward a neat line of prints. "A family of deer." Another set disappeared into a grove of young pines. Evelyn knelt beside clusters of evergreen plants that somehow remained green beneath the snow. She smiled. "Winter only looks asleep." Samuel paused often to compare the ancient map with the landscape. "The river still follows the same bend. The cliffs haven't changed." He looked genuinely delighted. "Remarkable." Oliver couldn't help smiling. Even Samuel experienced wonder like a child when history came alive. As the sun climbed higher, the forest grew denser. The trees became older, much older. Their trunks were wider than cottage doors, their branches stretching high above until only narrow ribbons of sky remained visible. moss-covered fallen logs in thick emerald blankets. Tiny icicles hung from every branch. The silence here felt different, deeper. Oliver instinctively lowered his voice. "It feels like we're being watched." Thomas glanced upward. "Perhaps." "You say that very calmly." Thomas chuckled. "If the forest has been watching people for centuries, I doubt it's interested in frightening us." Shortly before noon, they reached a frozen stream. A narrow wooden bridge crossed the ice-covered water. Time had worn the bridge smooth, but it remained sturdy. Thomas stopped halfway across. He ran his hand across the railing. "This wasn't here when I was a boy." Samuel looked surprised. "It isn't on any map." Evelyn brushed snow from one of the wooden posts. There, carved almost invisibly into the weathered timber, was the familiar symbol, a pine tree enclosed within a perfect circle. Oliver touched it gently. "The founders again?" Samuel nodded. They wanted future travelers to know they were still on the right path. Beyond the bridge, the trail became harder to follow. Snow covered nearly everything. Only the occasional stone marker emerged above the white landscape. Each carried the same simple carving. No arrows, no distances, only the symbol. Oliver frowned. How did anyone know where to go? Evelyn smiled. They paid attention. They stopped for lunch in a small clearing surrounded by ancient cedars. Martha's bread tasted even better outdoors. Thomas brewed tea over a tiny camp stove. Steam curled upward into the crisp winter air. For a while, they spoke of ordinary things. Favorite books, the first snowfall each of them could remember, the funniest mistakes Thomas had made while learning carpentry. Oliver found himself laughing more than he had in years. He realized something unexpected. He no longer felt like a visitor. Somewhere between shared meals, quiet walks, and simple conversations, Everpine had begun to feel like home. After lunch, Samuel studied the map again. His expression slowly changed. "We're close." Oliver looked around. "I don't see a tower." "You won't?" Samuel pointed toward a rocky hillside, almost hidden beneath snow. "The map says it should be behind those cliffs." They climbed carefully. The slope was steep, and patches of ice made every step uncertain. At the top, the forest suddenly opened. A wide valley stretched before them. Oliver stopped breathing for a moment. There it was, half hidden among towering pines, built of weathered grey stone, its upper walls broken by time, its roof long since collapsed. Yet the old watchtower still stood, silent, patient, as though it had been waiting through countless winters for someone to find it again. No smoke rose from it. No birds circled above. Snow rested undisturbed upon its crumbling walls. Thomas removed his hat. I never believed it truly existed. Neither had Samuel. Even Evelyn looked quietly overwhelmed. Oliver took one slow step forward, then another. As they approached the tower, he noticed something that made him stop. There was only one set of footprints in the fresh snow, not leading away from the tower, leading toward it. And they had been made only moments before. The four of them stood perfectly still. Fresh snow covered the clearing like untouched parchment. Across its smooth white surface stretched a single trail of footprints. They began at the edge of the forest. They crossed the clearing. They disappeared through the open doorway of the ruined watchtower. There were no returning tracks. Thomas lowered his voice. Someone came here. Samuel studied the snow carefully. Very recently. The edges of the prints were still sharp. No wind had softened them. No new snow had fallen inside them. whoever had walked toward the tower had arrived only a short time before. Oliver felt an unexpected flutter of anticipation. Not fear, curiosity. The tower stood on a low rise overlooking the eastern forest. Up close, its age was impossible to ignore. Large cracks climbed the stone walls. Wild ivy slept beneath a thin layer of frost. One corner had collapsed many years ago, scattering weathered blocks across the hillside. Yet the doorway remained intact. Above the stone arch was a carving, not the familiar pine tree within a circle. This symbol was different. A single lantern hanging from the branch of an ancient pine. Samuel brushed centuries of dust and lichen away with his glove. "I've never seen this mark." Evelyn looked thoughtfully at the carving. "My grandmother mentioned it once." "What did she say?" Oliver asked. "She called it—" She searched her memory. "The Lantern of Returning." Thomas stepped carefully through the doorway first. The others followed. The air inside was cool, but surprisingly dry. Sunlight poured through the broken roof, illuminating thousands of tiny dust particles drifting lazily above the stone floor. The circular room was almost empty. A broken wooden table, several shelves carved directly into the walls, a cold stone fireplace, and a spiral staircase climbing toward the ruined upper level. Oliver expected abandonment. Instead, everything felt cared for. Not clean, but respected. As though whoever had last lived here had closed the door only yesterday. Near the fireplace stood a wooden chair. It was old, very old. Yet unlike everything else in the tower, it showed no signs of decay. Thomas walked toward it slowly. He ran his fingertips across the polished armrest. His expression softened. "I know this wood." Oliver looked surprised. "You do?" Thomas nodded. "White mountain ash. My grandfather planted one beside his workshop." He looked closer. "The joinery." His voice grew quieter. "These joints were made by my father." The room fell silent. Samuel looked up from the shelves. "Are you certain?" Thomas nodded without hesitation. "I repaired enough of his furniture to recognize his hands." Oliver frowned. "But your father never spoke about the tower." "No." Thomas looked around thoughtfully. "He said there was one place in Everpine where every carpenter hoped never to be needed." Evelyn wandered toward the narrow windows overlooking the valley. From there, Everpine appeared impossibly small. The rooftops were tiny dots beneath the snow. The church bell tower barely rose above the pines. "It watched everything," she whispered. Oliver joined her. "The whole valley." She nodded. "And the forest." He remembered the words on the map. One watches the valley. The other watches what must never leave it. If this tower watched the valley, then where was the second one? Meanwhile, Samuel had discovered a small alcove hidden behind one of the bookshelves. Inside rested a single wooden chest. Unlike the mysterious boxes beneath the library, this one carried a name. The letters had faded, but they remained legible. Elias Rowan Thomas froze. His face lost all color. "Elias." Oliver turned toward him. "The friend in the photograph." Thomas nodded slowly. "My best friend." The room grew very quiet. Thomas knelt before the chest without opening it. "I thought he left." Samuel spoke gently. "So did everyone." Thomas rested one hand on the lid. "But perhaps—" His voice broke ever so slightly. "He never did." With great care, Thomas lifted the lid. Inside were only a few possessions: a neatly folded wool scarf, a small notebook, a brass lantern, beautifully polished despite its age, and a sealed envelope. Across the front, in careful handwriting, were 5 words. For whoever finds this tower. Oliver looked at Thomas. You should open it. Thomas hesitated, then slowly broke the brittle wax seal. The letter inside had yellowed with age, but the ink remained remarkably clear. Thomas began reading aloud. If you are reading this, then the tower has not been forgotten after all. That is enough to make an old promise worthwhile. He paused, swallowing quietly. My name is Elias Rowan. If history remembers me at all, it may remember that I disappeared. That is true. But I did not leave Everpine. I stayed because someone had to. Oliver looked toward Samuel. Neither spoke. Thomas continued. The tower was never built to keep people out. It was built to make sure kindness never left the valley. Evelyn frowned. Kindness? Thomas looked just as confused. The letter continued. Every generation believes the promise protects an object, or a place, or a secret. They are mistaken. The promise has always protected something far easier to lose. Thomas's voice became almost a whisper. The promise protects the way people choose to live. Silence settled over the room. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Oliver felt those words sink deeply into his heart. Not gold, not magic, not power. Kindness, patience, community. The quiet rhythm of ordinary people caring for one another. Perhaps that had been Everpine's greatest treasure all along. Thomas folded the letter carefully. His eyes glistened, though he smiled. Elias always did write better than he spoke. Samuel laughed softly. I wish I'd met him. You almost certainly have. Thomas looked around the tower. Everything he protected, he gestured toward the valley below, is still here. Oliver stepped toward the broken window once more. The winter sun was already beginning to sink. Long golden shadows stretched across the forest. Then he noticed movement, far beyond the eastern ridge, on another distant hill. A second tower, smaller, darker, almost completely hidden among ancient pines, just as the map had promised, and at the very top of its ruined roof. A tiny bell caught the fading sunlight. It rang once, not because anyone touched it, but because the evening wind had finally reached it. Samuel followed Oliver's gaze. He grew very still. So, he whispered. The second tower was never a story. Oliver watched the lonely bell sway gently against the winter sky. Then, without taking his eyes off the distant hill, he spoke the thought that had quietly formed in his heart. If this tower protected how people live, he looked toward the shadowed silhouette of the second tower. What has that one been protecting all these years? No one answered Oliver's question. The 4 of them stood in silence, gazing across the snow-covered valley toward the distant tower. It was little more than a shadow against the western light. If not for the tiny bell catching the last rays of the sun, Oliver might never have noticed it. Thomas narrowed his eyes. I've lived here for 73 years, and this is the first time I've ever seen it. Samuel slowly folded Elias's letter. Perhaps it isn't the first time you've looked. It's the first time you've been able to see. Oliver glanced at him. What do you mean? Samuel smiled thoughtfully. History doesn't always hide itself. Sometimes it simply waits until people are ready to notice. The afternoon light was fading quickly. Winter days were short in Everpine. Thomas looked toward the sky. We shouldn't cross the forest after dark. Evelyn nodded. The snow will freeze, and the trails become difficult to follow. Oliver looked once more toward the second tower. Part of him wanted to continue immediately. Another part knew they had already found more in one day than anyone had expected. Samuel carefully placed Elias's letter inside his satchel. The second tower has waited a very long time. He smiled gently. It can wait one more night. They began the journey home. The forest felt different now. Not mysterious. Familiar. Oliver found himself noticing details he had missed that morning. The way sunlight turned the snow pale gold beneath the pines. The tiny tracks left by squirrels darting between tree roots. The soft whisper of evergreen branches brushing together high overhead. Even the silence had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt welcoming. As they crossed the old wooden bridge, Thomas paused. He rested one hand on the railing. "My father once told me something." Oliver smiled. "Another lesson?" Thomas chuckled. "I collected quite a few." "What did he say?" Thomas looked toward the frozen stream below. "He said a bridge has only one purpose. To help people cross?" "Yes." "But not to decide who deserves to." Oliver nodded slowly. That sounded exactly like something Elias would have believed. Perhaps that was why they had been friends. By the time they reached Everpine, evening had settled gently over the valley. Lanterns glowed behind cottage windows. The smell of soup drifted through the snowy streets. Children's laughter floated from somewhere near the village square. Nothing appeared unusual, yet word of their return spread quickly. Not because of the towers, because neighbors wanted to know if they were cold, if they were hungry, if they needed anything. Mrs. Alder from the cottage near the stream handed Thomas a loaf of rye bread. A farmer insisted on carrying Samuel's heavy satchel to the library. 2 children offered to brush the snow from Evelyn's boots. Oliver watched quietly. No one asked about discoveries. No one demanded explanations. They simply cared for one another. He suddenly understood Elias's letter far better than he had inside the tower. That evening, Martha served thick vegetable stew beside the bakery fireplace. The warmth filled every corner of the room. Outside, snow began falling again. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Oliver unfolded his notebook. For several minutes, he simply stared at the blank page. Then he wrote, "Perhaps a place is not protected by walls. Perhaps it is protected by the people who choose kindness, even when no one is watching." He smiled. For the first time in years, writing no longer felt difficult. It felt honest. Later, Samuel joined him in the attic room. He carried a long wooden tube tucked beneath his arm. "I found something else." Oliver laughed quietly. "I'm beginning to expect that sentence every evening." Samuel smiled. "I'll try not to disappoint you." Inside the tube was another map. Unlike the ancient survey, this one showed the valley during winter. Small handwritten notes covered nearly every corner. Oliver noticed one in particular. Near the second tower, someone had written, "The bell is not a warning. It is an invitation." There was no signature, only the familiar symbol beneath the words. Oliver frowned. "An invitation to what?" Samuel shook his head. "I don't know. But..." He reached into the tube once more. A second sheet slid free. It wasn't a map. It was music. Handwritten notes stretched across faded parchment. At the top was a title. "When the Valley Remembers Thomas," who had quietly climbed the stairs with 2 mugs of hot tea, stopped in the doorway. His expression changed instantly. "I know that melody." Samuel looked surprised. "You do?" Thomas nodded slowly. My mother used to hum it while she worked. I haven't heard it in 60 years. Evelyn, who had followed behind with fresh mint leaves for the tea, looked at the page. My grandmother sang it. Martha called from downstairs. So did mine. The four of them looked at one another. None had ever spoken about the song before. Yet each family had somehow remembered it. Not the words, only the melody. Samuel carefully turned the page over. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written a single instruction. When the bell rings again, sing before you search. Outside, carried faintly across the sleeping valley, a distant bell rang once. Not from the church, not from the first tower, from somewhere beyond the eastern forest. The sound was clear, gentle, and unmistakably closer than it had been before. The bell's gentle note faded into the winter air. No one in the attic spoke. The silence that followed did not feel frightening. It felt expectant. Oliver looked from Samuel to Thomas, then to Evelyn. Did everyone hear it? Thomas nodded slowly. I don't think anyone in the valley could have missed it. Below them, the bakery had grown quiet. The last customer had gone home. Only the crackling of the fireplace and the steady ticking of the old wall clock remained. Outside, snow continued to fall, softening every rooftop and every path beneath a blanket of white. Samuel carefully rolled the sheet of music back into its tube. We're not going into the forest tonight. Oliver looked surprised. The bell sounded closer. It did. Samuel smiled gently. And that is exactly why we should wait. Thomas chuckled. I've spent my whole life learning that the valley rarely rewards impatience. Evelyn nodded. Some doors open because you arrive. Others? She looked toward the dark window. Because you waited. The following day dawned beneath heavy grey clouds. It was the shortest day of the year. In Everpine, the villagers simply called it the longest night. Oliver noticed something unusual as he walked through the village. No one appeared busy. The carpenter's workshop remained closed. The library opened only for the morning. Even the bakery baked fewer loaves than usual. Children carried evergreen branches through the streets, while their parents hung tiny glass lanterns outside every home. What are they preparing for? Oliver asked Martha. She smiled as she tied a red ribbon around a loaf of bread. Tonight. What happens tonight? We remember. By afternoon, the village square had transformed. Instead of festive decorations like the harvest festival, everything was simple. White candles, evergreen wreaths, small wooden lanterns carved by Thomas over many winters. No music echoed through the streets. No market stalls appeared. Even the children spoke more softly than usual. Oliver found Samuel placing several old journals upon a table outside the library. What's all this? Stories. Samuel smiled. Tonight every family reads one story aloud. From these journals? Some. He picked up a weathered notebook. Others bring letters, recipes, old poems. Anything that reminds them of someone who helped make Everpine what it is. Oliver looked around the square. So tonight isn't about the past. Samuel nodded. No. It's about gratitude. As evening approached, the first stars appeared between the clouds. The snow had finally stopped. Cold, clear air settled over the valley. Every cottage window glowed with warm light. Families slowly gathered in the square, carrying lanterns. Thomas arrived with a bundle wrapped carefully in linen. Inside were small wooden birds, one for every child in the village. I make them every year. Oliver picked one up. Each bird was different. No two carvings were alike. You never repeat the design? Thomas smiled. Neither does nature. Nearby, Evelyn distributed tiny cloth sachets filled with dried lavender, pine needles, and rosemary. They're for keeping. Oliver held one close. It carried the quiet scent of the forest. My grandmother believed every winter should have something that reminded you spring would return. As darkness settled completely, the church bell rang once. The entire village grew still. An elderly woman stepped forward carrying a single candle. Without speaking, she lit the lantern beside the fountain. The flame passed quietly from one lantern to the next. Soon, hundreds of warm lights shimmered across the square. Not one electric bulb, only candles. The village glowed like a constellation beneath the winter sky. One by one, people began sharing their stories. A young father read a letter written by his grandfather during a harsh winter many years earlier. An elderly baker spoke about the woman who had first taught Martha to knead bread. A little girl proudly read 3 sentences about the stray dog her family had adopted. There was laughter. There were tears. There were long, peaceful silences. Oliver realized something. No story celebrated greatness. Every story celebrated kindness. Finally, Samuel looked toward Oliver. Would you like to read something? Oliver hesitated. I don't have anything. Thomas smiled. You've been writing. Oliver looked down at the notebook in his hands. He hadn't intended to share it, yet somehow it felt right. He stood slowly. The square grew quiet. He opened the notebook to the page he had written the previous evening. His voice was calm. Perhaps a place is not protected by walls. Perhaps it is protected by the people who choose kindness, even when no one is watching. When he finished, no one applauded. No one needed to. The silence itself felt like acceptance. Martha smiled warmly. Samuel nodded. Thomas quietly wiped one eye before pretending to adjust his scarf. Then, the distant bell rang again. Once, twice, 3 times. The entire village turned toward the eastern forest. No one looked frightened, only attentive. Thomas whispered, "It's time." Without a word, every villager lifted their lantern, just as they had during the harvest festival. Only this time, instead of walking toward the oldest pine, they faced the eastern ridge. Samuel looked at Oliver. The song. Oliver blinked. The one we found. Samuel nodded. We don't know the words. Thomas smiled. We never needed them. He began humming the melody, softly. Evelyn joined, then Martha, then the children, then the entire village. Hundreds of quiet voices carried the ancient tune into the winter night. No lyrics, only music. The melody drifted across the snow-covered valley, toward the distant forest, toward the unseen tower, toward the bell. The final note faded. For one perfect moment, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere beyond the eastern ridge, a second melody answered. Not sung by the villagers, not played by any instrument. It floated gently through the forest itself, as though the wind had learned the same song centuries ago, and had finally decided to sing it back. No one moved until the last note faded into the night. The answering melody drifted across the valley like a whisper carried by the wind, lingering among the pine branches before dissolving into silence. Oliver looked around the square. Every face reflected the same quiet wonder. Not surprise, recognition, as though the villagers had been waiting for this moment all their lives. Thomas lowered his lantern. I've heard stories about this. Samuel smiled gently. My grandfather wrote about it. Evelyn's eyes remained fixed on the dark outline of the eastern forest. My grandmother said the valley always answers. Oliver looked at her. You believed her? She nodded. I hoped. No one entered the forest that night. Instead, the villagers slowly returned to their homes, carrying their lanterns through the snow-covered streets. There was no disappointment, no urgency, only a shared understanding that some answers arrived best after patience. Oliver walked beside Thomas. I thought we'd follow the sound. Thomas smiled. So did I. What changed? The valley. Oliver frowned. I don't understand. Thomas looked toward the stars. If the valley wanted us there tonight, they wouldn't have answered from a distance. The weeks that followed passed gently. Winter slowly loosened its grip on Everpine. Snow melted from cottage roofs. Icicles disappeared one drop at a time. The frozen stream beneath the old bridge began to sing again as clear water flowed over smooth stones. Children traded sleds for kites. Farmers repaired fences. Martha opened the bakery windows for the first time since autumn. The scent of fresh bread once again drifted through the morning air. Oliver realized that, without noticing, he had become part of the village's rhythm. He helped Thomas repair benches in the square. He carried books for Samuel. He planted early herbs with Evelyn. He even learned to shape bread beneath Martha's patient guidance, though his loaves were rarely as beautiful as hers. Nobody minded. They taste honest, Martha would say with a smile. And that's enough. One bright morning in early spring, Oliver found himself standing beneath the great pine in Evelyn's garden. Tiny green buds had appeared along the ancient branches. The pine cone that had fallen months earlier still rested on a wooden shelf beside the cottage door. Evelyn noticed him looking at it. I never planted its seeds. Why not? She picked it up gently. It wasn't ready. Oliver smiled. How can you tell? She handed him the pine cone. Its scales, once tightly closed, had begun to open. Inside rested dozens of tiny winged seeds. It waited through winter. She looked toward the warming sunlight. Some things need cold before they can grow. Oliver quietly thought about his own life before Everpine. Perhaps people did too. That afternoon, Samuel hurried across the village square, carrying a folded letter. Oliver had never seen the librarian walk so quickly. I've received a reply. A reply? Samuel nodded. I wrote to the historical archives in the nearest city. What did they say? He unfolded the carefully preserved letter. They found one record. Only one. Thomas joined them outside the library. So? Samuel adjusted his glasses. The document mentions a traveler. Oliver's heartbeat quickened. A traveler? Yes. It says he visited Everpine almost 70 years ago. Samuel looked directly at Oliver. His name was... He paused. Daniel Ashford. Oliver frowned. I don't know anyone by that name. Samuel continued reading. The record says he stayed only 3 days. Before leaving, he carved a wooden token for the village. Oliver reached into his coat pocket almost instinctively. The smooth wooden token the elderly woman had given him was still there. He turned it over. The words remained unchanged. Return what is remembered. That evening, Oliver visited the elderly woman who had given him the token. Her cottage stood at the edge of the village, overlooking a small meadow filled with the first spring flowers. She welcomed him with warm tea and honey biscuits. You've come with questions, Oliver smiled. I seem to collect them. She laughed softly. So did your grandfather. Oliver blinked. My grandfather? She nodded. He wasn't Daniel. Oliver looked confused. No? No. She reached toward an old wooden cabinet and carefully removed a faded photograph. It showed a younger version of herself, standing beside two smiling men. Thomas recognized one immediately. Elias? The second man was unfamiliar. The third? Oliver's breath caught. He recognized the face from childhood photographs. His grandfather. You really knew him? The old woman nodded. He came here in the spring, just after the bell rang. Oliver stared at the photograph. He never told anyone. He promised not to. Why? She smiled gently. Because some promises aren't meant to hide secrets. They're meant to protect peace. Oliver looked again at his grandfather's face. For the first time, Everpine no longer felt like an accident. His journey had not begun when he boarded the bus. It had begun decades earlier, long before he was born, long before he had even heard the valley's name. The old woman placed another cup of tea before him. He always believed someone would return. Oliver looked up. Who? She met his eyes with quiet certainty. You. Outside, a warm spring breeze stirred the ancient pines. High above the valley, far beyond the eastern ridge, a small bell rang once. Not as a warning, not as a mystery, but as a welcome. The morning after Oliver visited the old woman's cottage, Everpine seemed brighter. Spring had quietly settled across the valley. Wildflowers dotted the meadows in soft shades of blue, yellow, and white. The river sparkled beneath the gentle morning sun, and the ancient pines swayed lazily in the warm breeze. Life had returned exactly as it always did, steadily, patiently, without asking anyone to notice. Oliver smiled as he crossed the village square. For the first time since arriving, he realized he no longer felt like someone searching for answers. He felt like someone learning how to live them. The bakery was already filled with the comforting aroma of fresh bread. Martha placed a warm cinnamon roll on the counter before Oliver could order. I didn't ask for this. I know. She poured him a cup of tea. You looked like someone who needed breakfast before questions. Oliver laughed. Does everyone in Everpine always know what people need? Martha pretended to think. No, she smiled. We simply pay attention. Later that morning, Oliver met Samuel outside the library. The librarian held a small wooden box tied with a faded green ribbon. I've been waiting for you. Oliver looked curiously at the box. What is it? I found it beneath the library. Samuel paused. It wasn't hidden. It was simply overlooked. He handed the box to Oliver. Written neatly across the lid were 4 words. For the next keeper. Oliver looked up. I'm not a keeper. Samuel smiled. Not yet. Inside the box were only 3 things. A small brass key, a blank leather journal, and a folded sheet of handmade paper. Oliver unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was instantly familiar. It belonged to Elias Rowan. If this box has reached you, then the valley has chosen another listener. Do not try to become its guardian. Simply become someone who notices. The valley has never needed heroes. It has always needed people willing to care. Oliver read the last sentence twice, then a 3rd time. Somehow, it felt less like advice, and more like an invitation. That afternoon, Thomas asked Oliver to help repair an old bench overlooking the river. The bench had weathered countless seasons. Its paint had faded. One leg had begun to loosen. Thomas handed Oliver a plane. Wood teaches patience. Oliver smiled. So you've told me. Thomas laughed. And it keeps proving me right. They worked side by side for several hours. No hurry, no unnecessary conversation. Only the quiet rhythm of hands shaping wood. When they finished, the bench looked almost new. Thomas stepped back and admired it. You see? What? We didn't build something new. We helped something old continue. Oliver looked at the bench thoughtfully. Somehow, that seemed to describe Everpine itself. In the days that followed, Oliver began filling the blank journal. Not with mysteries, not with maps, not even with stories about bells or forgotten towers. Instead, he wrote about everyday moments. A child helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries. Martha leaving fresh bread on a widow's doorstep before sunrise. Samuel laughing so hard that he nearly dropped a stack of books. Thomas teaching 2 young apprentices how to sharpen chisels. Evelyn planting wildflowers beside a path no visitor ever used. The journal slowly filled with ordinary kindness. And somehow, it became the most meaningful thing Oliver had ever written. One quiet evening, Oliver climbed the hill above the village. The sun was setting behind the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber, rose, and lavender. Everpine glowed below. Smoke rose gently from chimneys. The church bell marked the passing hour. Children's laughter drifted faintly through the evening air. He reached into his pocket. The old wooden token was still there. Return what is remembered. For months he had wondered what those words meant. Now, watching the peaceful valley below, he finally understood. You do not return memories by telling people about the past. You return them by living in a way that allows the best parts of the past to continue. As twilight deepened, Oliver noticed someone approaching along the hilltop path. It was the elderly woman. She smiled as she reached him. You've figured it out? Oliver nodded. I think so. She looked toward the valley. The promise was never about protecting a place. No. Oliver smiled. It was about protecting a way of living. The old woman closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warm breeze move gently through her silver hair. Elias would have been pleased. So would your grandfather. Oliver looked toward the distant eastern forest. The 2 forgotten towers were hidden by the evening haze. He realized something that surprised him. He no longer felt the need to visit the second tower immediately. Some mysteries became smaller once their purpose was understood. As the first stars appeared overhead, a familiar bell rang softly across the valley. Once, clear, gentle. Oliver listened. Then, for the first time since arriving in Everpine, he did not follow the sound. He simply smiled, because he knew the bell was no longer calling him to search. It was reminding him to stay. And in the quiet valley of Everpine, where stories were carried not by monuments, but by ordinary acts of kindness, spring had returned once again. But this time, it felt like home. Spring settled gently over Everpine. The apple trees blossomed along the village lanes, covering the valley in clouds of white and pale pink. Bees wandered lazily from flower to flower, while the river, now free from winter ice, hurried happily between smooth stones polished by countless seasons. The village had returned to its familiar rhythm. Martha baked before sunrise. Thomas filled his workshop with the steady sound of carving tools. Samuel opened the library windows each morning to let fresh air mingle with the scent of old books. Evelyn could usually be found somewhere among her gardens, quietly speaking to seedlings that seemed to grow a little taller whenever she smiled at them. Life continued, Not because the mysteries had ended, but because life always did. Oliver had now lived in Everpine for nearly 6 months. At first, he still thought of himself as a visitor, then as a guest. Now, he wasn't quite sure what he was. No one had ever asked him to stay. No one had ever asked him to leave. Somehow, the valley had simply made room for him. Each morning before breakfast, Oliver walked to the hill overlooking the village. From there he could see nearly everything. The church steeple rising above the rooftops, the winding river catching the morning light, the eastern forest stretching toward the distant mountains. Sometimes he thought about the second tower. He knew it was still there, hidden among the ancient pines, waiting. Oddly enough, it no longer felt impatient. Neither did he. One bright Monday morning, as Oliver returned from his walk, he found Samuel standing outside the library. The librarian held a single envelope. It was unlike any letter Oliver had ever seen. The paper was thick and cream-colored. Its edges were trimmed in deep forest green. A tiny wax seal held the flap closed. The seal bore no pine tree. Instead, it showed a simple feather resting beside an open book. Samuel looked unusually thoughtful. It arrived before sunrise. Oliver frowned. There wasn't a name on the envelope. There was. Samuel turned it over. In elegant handwriting were only 4 words. For the listener of Everpine, Oliver felt an unexpected chill despite the warm spring air. That's... Samuel nodded. The title Elias used. Neither of them spoke for a moment. They carried the letter into the quiet reading room at the back of the library. Sunlight streamed through the tall window, filling the room with gentle warmth. Thomas arrived a few minutes later, carrying a small wooden box he had been repairing. Evelyn followed with fresh mint tea. Without planning it, the 4 friends had gathered once again around the old oak table, much like they had on the day everything began. Samuel carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was graceful but unfamiliar. He began to read aloud. If this letter has reached Everpine, then time has been kinder than I expected. My name is Clara Rowan. Thomas looked up instantly. Rowan? Samuel nodded slowly and continued. I am the granddaughter of Elias Rowan. The room became perfectly still. Oliver glanced toward Thomas. His old friend had gone pale. Elias had a family? Thomas whispered. I never knew. The letter continued. My grandfather rarely spoke about the valley. Only during the final weeks of his life did he tell me that somewhere beyond the northern mountains, there was a place where promises were remembered longer than names. Evelyn quietly folded her hands. The words sounded exactly like something Elias would have written. Samuel read on. He left me one request. He asked that one day I return something to Everpine. Thomas's eyes filled with quiet emotion. He was always planning for tomorrow. Oliver nodded softly. What did he leave? Samuel turned the page. At the very bottom was a single sentence. I will arrive on the first full moon of spring. Please ring the bell once. No signature. Only the same feather and book symbol pressed into blue wax. The room remained silent long after Samuel lowered the letter. Finally, Oliver asked the question everyone had been thinking. Who rings the bell? Thomas looked toward the eastern window. I don't think anyone does. Samuel smiled thoughtfully. Perhaps. The bell chooses. Outside, the wind stirred gently through the blossoming apple trees. Far above the village, somewhere beyond the eastern forest, a lone bird circled the sky, before disappearing toward the distant mountains. Oliver walked to the library window. For months, Everpine had been teaching him how to listen. Now, for the first time, it seemed the world beyond the valley had begun listening too. The days passed quietly after the letter arrived. No one in Everpine treated it as an emergency. There were gardens to tend, bread to bake, books to repair, benches to mend, children to teach. The valley had always believed that ordinary responsibilities were not interruptions to life. They were life. Oliver found comfort in that. Even with unanswered questions waiting just beyond the horizon, the people of Everpine continued caring for one another with the same quiet devotion they always had. Perhaps that was why the valley had endured for so many generations. Every evening, Oliver climbed the hill above the village. The moon grew a little fuller each night. The apple blossoms had begun to drift through the air, covering the paths like pale pink snow. One evening, Thomas joined him. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Thomas said, "I've been thinking about Elias." Oliver looked toward him. "You miss him?" Thomas smiled sadly. "I've missed him for 50 years. He picked up a fallen blossom and rolled it gently between his fingers. "You know, we were going to leave Everpine together." Oliver turned. "You were?" Thomas nodded. "When we were young, we dreamed of seeing the ocean." "What happened?" Thomas looked toward the distant eastern forest. "Life asked different things of each of us. Elias stayed, and I came home." There was no regret in his voice, only gratitude. Meanwhile, Samuel spent nearly every afternoon searching through the oldest records in the library. Late one evening, he hurried into Martha's bakery, carrying a thin ledger covered in dust. "I found the feather." Oliver looked up from the table. "The feather?" Samuel opened the ledger. Drawn carefully in faded ink was the same symbol from Clara Rowan's letter, a feather resting beside an open book. Beneath it, someone had written, "The Society of Traveling Listeners." Oliver frowned. "I've never heard of them." "Neither had I." Samuel adjusted his glasses. "The records say very little." "What do they say?" Samuel read quietly. "Some stories belong to one village. Others belong to the world. The traveling listeners carried both." Evelyn smiled softly. "So Everpine wasn't alone?" Samuel nodded. "It seems not." The night of the full moon finally arrived. The valley shimmered beneath silver light. Every rooftop glowed softly. The river reflected the stars so clearly that it seemed another sky flowed through Everpine. The villagers gathered peacefully in the square. No celebration had been announced. Yet somehow everyone knew. Children held lanterns. Parents stood quietly together. The elders smiled, as though welcoming an old friend. Oliver noticed something unexpected. No one appeared curious. They appeared prepared. The church bell struck 9. Almost immediately, a second bell answered. Not from the church, not from the eastern forest, from the northern road. Thomas looked toward the sound. "That's new." A few moments later, a solitary figure appeared beneath the moonlight. She walked slowly, carrying a weathered leather satchel across one shoulder. Her silver-grey traveling cloak fluttered gently in the evening breeze. She couldn't have been older than 30. When she reached the edge of the square, she stopped. For several seconds, she simply looked around the village. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. Then she smiled. "I always wondered if it truly existed." Samuel stepped forward. "You must be Clara Rowan." She nodded. "And you must be Samuel." He looked surprised. "You know my name?" "My grandfather spoke about the librarian who would someday read the letter." Samuel laughed softly. He had remarkable confidence. He usually did. Clara reached into her satchel. Instead of removing a book or another letter, she carefully lifted out a small wooden box wrapped in blue linen. Thomas stared at it. "I know that box." Clara smiled. "My grandfather made it." She placed it gently into Thomas's hands. "I've carried it for 12 years. Thomas ran his fingers across the smooth wood. His eyes widened. The grain matched the chair they had found in the first watchtower. The same careful craftsmanship. The same quiet attention to detail. "What is inside?" Oliver asked. Clara looked toward the eastern forest before answering. "My grandfather told me never to open it. Only to return it." Thomas looked uncertain. "Should we open it now?" Clara shook her head gently. "No." She smiled at Oliver. He said, "The listener would know when the valley was ready." Oliver looked down at the beautifully carved box. It felt surprisingly warm in his hands. Not magically warm, comfortably warm, like something that had been carried with great care for a very long time. At that very moment, a gentle breeze moved through the square. The lantern flames flickered. Far beyond the eastern forest, the distant bell rang once, and this time, from somewhere deep within the wooden box. A second, softer bell answered. For one brief moment, no one moved. The soft chime from inside the wooden box faded as gently as it had begun. The village square remained perfectly still. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Oliver looked down at the box resting in his hands. It had no lock. No hinges were visible. Only a smooth lid of pale mountain ash, polished by time until it felt almost like river stone. Thomas whispered, "I've heard that sound before." Samuel turned toward him. "When?" Thomas smiled faintly. "I was 12. Elias and I were repairing a fence near the eastern meadow. He was carrying this very box." Oliver looked up. "Did you ask what was inside?" Thomas laughed quietly. "Of course." "And what did he say?" Thomas's eyes drifted toward the stars. "He said, 'Some things aren't hidden because they're dangerous. They're hidden because they need the right moment.'" Clara rested her satchel beside the fountain. For a while, no one asked another question. Instead, Martha appeared from the bakery, carrying a basket covered with a linen cloth. "Before mysteries," she said with a smile, "everyone should have something warm to eat." The villagers laughed softly. Within minutes, cups of hot herb tea were being passed from hand to hand. Fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and apple tarts appeared on the long wooden tables. Oliver noticed Clara watching everything with quiet amazement. "This is exactly how Grandfather described it," she said. Thomas smiled. "What did he tell you?" "He said Everpine had a strange habit." "What habit?" Clara looked around the square. "It never let important moments become more important than people." Later that evening, after most of the villagers had returned home, the 6 friends gathered in the library's reading room. Oliver, Thomas, Martha, Samuel, Evelyn, and now Clara. The wooden box rested in the center of the old oak table. Samuel lit a single oil lamp. Its warm light filled the room. No one reached for the lid. Instead, Clara began telling stories about her grandfather. He never spoke much about himself. She smiled. But he spoke often about Thomas. Thomas looked embarrassed. "I hope only the good parts." Clara laughed. "Mostly," she continued. "He said you once spent an entire afternoon repairing a bird's nest after a storm." Thomas cleared his throat. "I was young. You were kind." Thomas looked down at his hands. "My father would have done the same." One story followed another. Elias teaching children to carve whistles from willow branches. Elias reading aloud to travelers who couldn't read. Elias quietly replacing broken tools in a neighbor's workshop without leaving his name. Oliver noticed something remarkable. Every story sounded exactly like the valley itself. Patient, gentle, unhurried. Perhaps that was why Elias had chosen to remain. He hadn't merely protected Everpine. He had become part of it. As midnight approached, Samuel unfolded the old map once again. This time, Clara leaned over it with great interest. Her finger stopped near the second tower. "My grandfather drew this." Everyone looked at her. "How do you know?" She pointed toward a tiny detail hidden among the trees. A small sketch of a wren perched on a branch. He always signed his drawings with a bird instead of his name. Thomas smiled. "I'd forgotten that." "So," Oliver said thoughtfully. Elias updated the map. Clara nodded. "Not long before he died." Evelyn looked toward the wooden box. "If he'd changed the map," she said quietly. "Perhaps he left something new inside as well." For the first time that evening, everyone looked at the lid. Oliver gently placed his hands upon it. Nothing happened. He didn't feel disappointed. Instead, he remembered the words carved onto the old stone marker in the forest. "Beyond here, listen." He closed his eyes. The room was silent. He listened. Not for magic, not for bells. Just listened. He heard the ticking of the library clock, the crackling of the fireplace downstairs, the wind brushing softly against the old windows, someone breathing quietly beside him. Then, a tiny click. Oliver opened his eyes. The lid had shifted. Only a fraction, just enough to reveal a narrow gap. Thomas stared in disbelief. No lock. Samuel smiled. It seems listening was the key. Oliver slowly lifted the lid. Inside, there was no treasure, no jewels, no ancient artifact. Only 3 carefully arranged objects. A folded piece of parchment, a small linen pouch, and a simple wooden flute, worn smooth with age. Clara's eyes filled with tears. That was his. Thomas picked up the flute with trembling hands. He carved it when we were boys. Samuel unfolded the parchment. The handwriting was unmistakably Elias's. Across the top, he had written, "To the one who opened the box below, that a single sentence. If you have reached this page, then Everpine no longer needs another keeper." Oliver frowned. "What does he mean?" Samuel continued reading. "It needs someone willing to carry its kindness beyond the valley." The room fell silent. Outside, somewhere beyond the open library window, a robin began singing. The first bird of the new dawn. Elias's final message was only beginning. And with the sunrise, so was Oliver's next journey. The robin's song welcomed the first light of dawn. Soft rays of sunlight filtered through the library windows, turning the floating dust into tiny flecks of gold. Outside, Everpine slowly awakened. A baker opened a window. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crowed. The river whispered over smooth stones, exactly as it had yesterday, and the day before that. Life continued, as it always had. Oliver looked down at Elias's unfinished letter. The final sentence rested quietly on the page. It needs someone willing to carry its kindness beyond the valley. No one spoke for several moments. At last, Martha broke the silence. "I think Elias understood something most people forget. Oliver looked at her. What was that? She smiled gently. Kindness only grows when it's shared. Samuel carefully turned the page. Everyone leaned closer. The reverse side contained another paragraph, written in the same calm, elegant hand. If you are reading this, then the valley has already taught you everything it can. Do not stay because you are afraid to leave. Leave because you have learned how to return. Thomas let out a long, quiet breath. That sounds exactly like him. Oliver felt the words settle deeply within him. For months, he had thought Everpine was asking him to remain forever. Now he wondered if it had been preparing him for something else entirely. That afternoon, Oliver wandered through the village alone. He wasn't searching for answers. He was simply noticing. Mrs. Alder helped a young boy plant tomatoes behind her cottage. Two brothers repaired an old fence without being asked. At the bakery, Martha quietly slipped an extra loaf into a traveler's bag. She never mentioned it. She simply smiled and wished him a safe journey. Oliver realized something. No one in Everpine thought of these acts as extraordinary. They were as natural as breathing. Perhaps that was the valley's true miracle. Later, he climbed the familiar hill overlooking the village. The wind carried the scent of pine and blooming apple trees. The second tower remained hidden beyond the eastern forest. He no longer felt compelled to visit it. Some places did not need to be conquered. They needed to be respected. As he stood there, Clara joined him. She carried Elias's old flute. I thought you might like to hear it. Oliver smiled. Can you play? A little. She lifted the flute to her lips. The melody that filled the evening air was simple, gentle, the same tune the villagers had hummed during the longest night. This time, however, it had words. Softly, Clara sang, Carry the light when morning calls, leave no kindness locked behind. Every road becomes a home for the gentle heart and mind. When the song ended, neither of them spoke. It needed no explanation. The following morning, Samuel called everyone together in the library. I've made a decision. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Should we be worried? Samuel laughed. Not today. He reached beneath the desk and placed a freshly bound journal before Oliver. Its cover was deep green leather. Across the front, embossed in gold, were 5 simple words. The Journal of Quiet Journeys. Oliver looked puzzled. What is this for? Samuel smiled. For whatever comes next. You expect me to travel? I expect nothing. The librarian closed the journal gently. But if you do, write. Over the next several days, the village quietly prepared. Not for a farewell, for a beginning. Thomas carved Oliver a walking stick from mountain ash. The wood is strong, he said, but don't lean on it too much. You'll forget your own strength. Martha packed enough bread, dried fruit, and herb biscuits for several weeks. Share them, she insisted. Food tastes better that way. Evelyn tucked small packets of wildflower seeds into Oliver's satchel. Plant them wherever people need beauty. Clara gave him Elias's flute. My grandfather wanted someone else to continue the song. Finally, Samuel handed Oliver a folded map. It showed no roads, no mountains, no rivers. Only one sentence written across the center. The next story begins wherever kindness is needed most. Oliver laughed softly. That's not much of a map. Samuel smiled. The best ones rarely are. On the morning of his departure, the entire village gathered beside the old stone bridge. No speeches were made. No grand ceremony was held. Children hugged Oliver. Neighbors shook his hand. Thomas embraced him without saying a word. Sometimes friendship needed no language. Martha straightened his scarf one last time. "You know where home is?" Oliver nodded. "I do." Evelyn placed a tiny pine seed into his palm. "It waited through winter." She smiled. "Now it's your turn to grow." Oliver crossed the bridge slowly. Halfway across, he paused. He turned back. Everpine looked exactly as it had on the day he arrived. Peaceful, patient, timeless. The villagers raised their hands in farewell. Oliver smiled. Then he continued down the winding road beyond the valley.